A call to order the Public Infrastructure and Utilities
I
Committee.
can't hear anything. Joe, can you hear anything?
We are going to pause for a moment to make sure everyone can
I
hear anything.
don't hear a thing, no.
Great.
Okay.
I think they are talking about us.
Okay.
Can you hear us?
Yes, now.
Yes,
Fantastic. Thank you. I will call to order the Public Infrastructure and Utilities Committee meeting of the Board of Aldermen. It is Monday, March 25th, 2024 at 10 a.m. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Balmer.
unbutton. Present.
Alderwoman Keys.
You present?
Alderman Browning.
Present.
Alderman Aldridge.
Present.
Chair Schweitzer.
Present.
We have 5 present. You have a quorum.
Quorum being established, we will move to approval of the minutes. I will accept a motion to approve the minutes of Wednesday, March 6th, 2024.
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Balmer.
Aye.
Alderwoman Keys.
Aye.
Alderman Browning.
Aye.
Alderman Aldridge.
Aye.
Chair Schweitzer.
Aye.
5 aye votes.
Thank you. By your vote, we have approved the minutes of Wednesday, March 6th, 2024, and we'll move on to item number 4 on the agenda, Board Bills Review. Item number 1 is Board Bill number 237. Alderwoman Tyus, you are recognized.
Morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I have before the committee Board Bill 237. I sent a amendment in, which should be in your Google Docs, and I have a clean copy and a marked copy, because I'm fastidious like that. It would be the word, or regimented, whichever one it is. And what Board Bill 237 is speed humps in various parts of what is now the 12th Ward. It's cleaning up some of the old First Ward. I'm finishing up the very last amount, so everybody who I promised speed humps will get them. And then I picked up what was the 4th Ward. And so we do a very meticulous in order so that nobody gets too much traffic put on them. And so now we're working on what was the 4th Ward, mostly to put speed humps where they didn't get them the last time. And I would ask for the committee to do a motion to put before it amendment number 1 to Board Bill 237.
Thank you. Can I have a motion for that, please?
So moved.
Oh, second.
Any call for previous roll?
Previous row.
That we have put amendment number 1 of Board Bill 237 in front of our committee. Please continue.
And I also forgot, in your Google Docs, there should also be maps, because when I was the chair of streets, I am a map person. Everybody doesn't know your ward, so you try to at least show them the neighborhoods that things are going on in. What I am doing with amendment number 4 is I am adding...
Amendment 1.
I'm sorry, number 1. I'm adding I'm adding the 4400 block of Catherine Place and the 4300 block of Centra, which I left out. And I'm putting 2 speed humps on Catherine Place and 3 on Central, which is about 3 or 4 blocks long. So I had forgot to put that in there, and I am adding that, and that is the amendment.
Does anyone in the committee have any questions on this amendment?
No question.
Seeing none, I will accept a motion to adopt amendment number 1 to Board Bill 237.
I move that we adopt amendment number 1 to Board Bill 237.
Second.
Second.
Previous roll.
Any objection to previous roll? Hearing none, we have adopted amendment number 1 to Board Bill 237. Alderman Tyus, please continue.
Okay, now Board Bill 237 as amended, I have before the committee, and I'm asking for your for your support and a do-pass recommendation for the various speed humps in both the Penrose neighborhood, This will that will finish up the Penrose neighborhood that I represent, the Kingsway Eastern neighborhood, and the Greaterville neighborhood.
Thank you, Alderwoman. For the sake of time, I'll just ask if anyone on the committee has any questions. Seeing none, I will entertain a motion for a due pass recommendation of Board Bill 237 as amended.
I'd like to make a motion that we do pass Board Bill 237 as amended.
Second.
Previous row.
Previous roll.
Any objection to previous rule? Hearing no objection, we have passed Board Bill 237 as amended out of committee with a due pass recommendation. Thank you, Alderwoman, for your time.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee, and this was much faster than the last time when I gave up my first spot. So thank you for allowing me to be first.
You're welcome. Thank you. We have a lot more on the agenda today, different bills regarding so many different pieces of our streets and traffic enforcement, and we will be going through every other bill on the agenda next. So we'll move next to Alderman Cone. You are recognized on Board Bill number 105.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Board Bill 105, I believe, is a bill that everyone is familiar with at this juncture. I don't want to belabor the merits of the bill any more than I already have, but I will give just a couple highlights real quick. There is a committee substitute that was filed with the clerk last week that should be on everyone's drive, so I would like to take that up in a moment. And then I have a couple amendments that I would like to work through with the committee as well. Board Bill 105 is the Automated Camera Enforcement Act. This is a companion bill along with Board Bill 106, which establishes the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Improvement Fund. I introduced this bill late last year with the intent of ensuring that we're addressing and putting more tools in our toolbox in terms of addressing the traffic fatalities and crashes and other concerns that are happening on our streets across the city. I think it's very clear to many folks that the capacity within the police department from an enforcement perspective is just not there. It's not adequate for the safety of our citizens that are walking, driving, biking on our streets. And we continue to see growth in fatal crashes across the city. Pedestrian fatalities are a 40-year high. And we continue, and even in my neck of the woods, having issues with just pedestrian and cyclist safety as a whole. The prior program that was in place was ruled unconstitutional. I was a huge opponent of red light cameras when I first got down here because of the issues I believe that were in place in terms of due process and also the lack of surveillance oversight. This legislative body, this session, I think has made some great strides with respect to providing that oversight for our surveillance programs in the city of St. Louis. And the Supreme Court in its infinite wisdom, provided some guideposts for municipalities when they were to potentially implement these type of automated enforcement programs in the future, which I have worked with the mayor's office, the city councilor's office, and others in ensuring that we're addressing those constitutional issues and ensuring that we maintain due process rights for our citizens. I do have, as I mentioned, a committee substitute and some amendments this morning that I'll walk through, but at this time, I'm not a member of the committee, so I can't introduce the committee substitute, but I would like to take up the committee substitute to Board Bill 105.
Thank you, Alderman Cone. I will entertain a motion to place the committee substitute of Board Bill 105 in front of us.
So moved.
Second.
Previous row.
Hearing no objection to previous roll, Board Bill 105 committee substitute is in front of us.
Great, thank you. So the committee substitute, I'm not sure if you all have had the opportunity to read it yet, but as I mentioned, it was submitted to the clerk last week. There's a couple changes in here that I'd like to walk through with the committee and for the benefit of the public. The first is in the first paragraph, and throughout the document, editing or revising the term traffic control to camera enforcement systems. And then later, when we get into section 2, underneath definitions, we include traffic violations, added the word traffic instead of just having the term violation standing alone, so that these would be used specifically for the purposes of traffic violations. So that's an addition to the definitions. And then further in the definition section, elaborating on what that traffic violation definition is. And then underneath section 5, which is the vendor requirements, and underneath the request for proposal, I added the street department director to the RFP committee. That was at the request of the street director. I had a conversation with her when I first introduced Board Bill 105, and she indicated that she believed that she should be part of that process, which I wholeheartedly agree with. So we made sure that she's part of that deliberative process. So further into the bill on page 7, again, underneath the vendor section here, we also added language in terms of the vendor's ability to collect data that's necessary to comply with section 11. So we want to make sure that the vendor has the ability to assist with compliance in this. And then when possible, well, so some of this is actually being struck in with some of the amendments here. So also further adding that the vendor shall not alter, function, the duration, or schedule of traffic control signals. That was feedback that had been provided in terms of kind of eliminating a potential gotcha where the timing of signals would be changed by a vendor. It's not something that the vendor would have the capacity to do because our signals are so old, they're very analog, and you would have to do that in person for many of them, but still wanted to make it clear that the vendor does not have control over the signalization requirements on our streets. That would still be the responsibility of the streets department, and that we continue to ensure that the fees or fines that are collected through this program would go to the administration of the program and to the Neighborhood Safety Improvement Fund for the benefit of our communities. We did add language in here with respect to an assessment process and ensuring that that's done on a monthly basis, and that the total number and that there's a process that's associated for evaluation of removal of these in the event that they're not effective. And that's generally the contents of the committee substitute.
Thank you. And you made mention to some of these things being addressed further by your amendments.
Correct.
Okay. But at this time, would you like us to go ahead and adopt this version of the committee
I would very
substitute?
much appreciate that, yes.
Okay. Before we make that vote, does anyone have any questions at this time? Just to adopt the committee substitute and then go through the.
I would ask, Madam Chair, if there are members of the public that would like to comment just in general on Board Bill 105, if they could be allowed to speak. And then when we get to the amendments, I do have Casey from the mayor's office and Judge McCoy as well to
Wonderful.
for any question. But
I assumed that you'd want them to talk after we'd adopted all of at least the
that's
committee
fine.
substitute.
Sure.
But if you'd like them to speak now and then
that's fine.
you want to do the committee substitute adoption for, okay, awesome. So that's the time I will take entertain a motion to adopt committee substitute for Board Bill 105.
I move that we adopt the committee substitute to Board Bill 105.
Second. Previous row.
Any objection to previous roll? Hearing none, we have adopted committee substitute for Board Bill 105. Alderman Cohen, you are now recognized on Board Bill 105 committee.
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, I do have several amendments that working in conjunction with the mayor's office and the municipal judge, had some feedback on the committee substitute, and wanted to make sure that we're making this operational
Right.
in terms of how we're going to function once this program is in place. And so,
Christian, can you help, please?
Yeah, can we-
Thank you so much. Mr. Bishop, I should say.
and actually, Christian,
Mr. Bishop.
an overview of the amendment.
Thanks, Mr. Bishop.
I like Mr. Bishop. That's better. Thank you. Are we,
So amendment number 1, I also had Christian hand out an overview of the various amendments that we'll be addressing this morning. Amendment number 1 would broaden the vendor compliance applicability and adds vendor language requested by the courts. So it would remove reference to 11A and adds language that the courts requested, requiring prospective vendors to also detail their ability to provide the courts with access to information that alleged violators would be provided when they receive a citation. So essentially,
Alderman Conant, let's take a motion first to place the amendment number 1 to Board Bill number 105, committee substitute, in front of us.
So move.
Second.
Previous row.
Previous roll.
Thank you. Hearing no objection to previous roll, we are now discussing amendment number 1 to Board Bill number 105, committee substitute.
I kind of actually just went
You
through
did.
my
You
spiel.
did great.
So if you have any questions on amendment number 1, myself, Casey Milberg, or the judge would be happy to answer.
It may make sense, since we're going to go through a lot of these, if they're up in front of us, and can maybe speak to them if you'd like them to as we go. Or, I mean, I feel like this one's pretty clear, unless anyone has questions.
If you'd like, we can discuss all of them at the same time and then take votes separately on each of them. I'm fine with that.
Madam Clerk, would we be able to have all of them in front of us at the same time, or would we have to put them in front of us individually?
We would place the amendments before us first.
Can we take one motion to place amendments
Wanna
1
place
through
amendment 1 through,
in front of us, and then, okay, so let's go ahead and do that for expeditiousness sake.
Christian,
How many amendments do you have?
and
Jesus.
Okay, so I will entertain a motion to place amendments number 1 through 10 in front of us. Please.
If we don't vote for one of them,
We will take each one individually as a vote, but we'll put all of them in front of us at once, if we can get a motion.
I hear you. Amendment.
I move that we place amendments 1 through 10 in front of the committee for Board Bill 105, committee substitute.
this is 4. I need a pen.
Anyone second?
Second.
Any call for previous roll?
Previous roll.
Any objection to
I'm
previous
assuming-
roll?
Okay.
Okay, we have, hearing no objection to previous roll, amendments number 1 through 10 to Board Bill 105 committee substitute are now in front of us. Can you, let's keep them in order. Take 1 minute to have all the amendments in front of us before we move on. Thank you for everyone's patience. Here's 5,
Yeah, I got my 5.
3.
Forgot they're numbered at the top.
Thank you, Caitlin. 6, 7,
Thanks, Mr. Bishop. Thank you.
9. Thank you. Okay, committee members online, do you all have the amendments as well? Are these all in the clerk, or in the drive, Madam Clerk?
all amendments are in the drive.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. We are all organized. We have all of the amendments in front of us. Alderman Cohn, do you want to hear from Director Milberg on all of them at once at this time, or?
Sure.
Okay, that would be great. Okay, thank you. I think it'll be great if we go through them all at once, and then people can pick and choose as they're voting as they feel fit, but helps us with keeping us moving.
Sure. Well, good morning, and for the record, my name is Casey Milberg, Policy Director for Mayor Jones's office. First, want to start off by thanking Alderman Cohn for continuing to keep this moving. He's been working on this for a very long time, including over this weekend, most recently. So do want to start off by acknowledging that and thanking him for that. So I'm going to do a run through of the thinking with the amendments and start off by stating that the spirit of all these amendments is to try to preserve any of the changes put forward in the committee substitute and do so in a way that is most legally appropriate as well as makes them most operational. So the First Amendment removes a reference to Section 11A. That section only pertains to the piece of data that vendors would be required to provide that specifies the date and time of an alleged red light traffic violation. So in removing the reference to just 11A, what that does is broaden the requirement upon vendors to require them to instead demonstrate their ability to collect any and all data necessary to comply with this ordinance. The vendor has to be able to gather all the data that's required under due process as outlined in both Section 7D and fully of Section 11. So what this does is just broaden that requirement and says vendors have to demonstrate that they can comply with the ability to collect any and all data necessary under this ordinance. And then the second portion of Amendment 1 is adding in language requested by the courts, requiring that prospective vendors also detail their ability to provide the courts with access to the information that an alleged violator of this ordinance would be provided when they receive a citation. So for example, the courts could pull up on WebEx or some other video conferencing software the image showing the alleged running of a red light or the data showing the alleged speed violation. So this would simply add in the requirement that vendors also tell the city when they are participating in the RFP process that they have, the ability to provide the courts with that access to that information. So that's Amendment number 1. Any questions, comments, concerns?
Thank you. This sounds like it meets some of the operational and legal requirements of having this in place, if I just summarizing.
That's correct.
Awesome.
Yes. Yeah.
Any members of the committee have any questions? Seeing none on Zoom.
No.
Alderman Aldridge. Question?
No.
Alderman Browning, Vice Chair Browning? Okay. Can you move on to Amendment number 2, please?
Sure. Amendment number 2, you'll see a change in verbiage from tickets being updated to correct verbiage of citations as used elsewhere throughout this legislation. And then you'll also see the same removal of the reference to 11A and so that it broadens it up in the same way as the First Amendment.
Thank you. Any questions, members of the committee? Seeing none, amendment number 3, please.
Okay. Amendment number 3 is a pretty straightforward updating of intersectional references. Something that was noted was that while we put definitions in Section 2, currently the legislation has wording throughout the bill stating as defined in Section 1. So this strikes the word 1 and updates it with 2. And similarly, there's a striking of the word subsection 1 in a section that does not have a subsection 1 any longer. So it's a pretty straightforward intersectional reference cleanup amendment.
I feel like amendments like this read as Dr. Seuss books.
Correct.
Yeah. So thank you for this word salad.
Yes.
I appreciate that. So just updating sections as we've changed in the bill through the, got it. Anyone have any questions on this? Any members of the committee? Okay. Seeing none, amendment number 4, please.
Sure. Amendment number 4. So one of the features of the committee substitute, which is a very nice update to it, provides for, and we'll discuss this a little later on, a addition of a 30-day grace period, for lack of a better term, wherein during the first 30 days of operation of this new automated camera program, if you run a red light, run a stop sign, if you commit a speed violation, and you are caught through that on one of the automated camera systems, for the first 30 days, you'll receive a warning notice. It's part of the gradual onboarding of this program. And so, because that's being added in as a new section later on, we had to add in that the automated camera system is authorized to be used to issue warning notices in addition to violation notices. So it's a pretty simple update just to comport with that change that happens later on in the committee substitute.
Which makes the bill have the warnings instead of a full ticket issued in the first 30 days. Okay.
Correct.
And it just needs to make sure that we're saying that we're doing warning notices and
Violation notices,
And-
correct.
okay. Do you mind using the microphone, Alderman?
So just to clarify, it's the first 30 days from the installation of the camera, not from the implementation of the program.
So
itself.
anytime there's a new camera placed.
Anytime there's a new camera placed, there would be a 30-day warning period where folks essentially are notified that the cameras are in existence at that intersection.
Fascinating. Okay, thank you. Any other members of the committee have questions? Amendment?
I do got a question.
Sure, Alderman Aldridge, you're recognized.
I guess for the more structural, how would the public know if the camera is new? Would this be like online? How will there be discretion if the public say, I didn't see this camera 15 days ago and now it's there and I fell in that 30-day grace period?
It's an excellent question, Alderman. There's a requirement, a board bill that would mandate signage that would indicate that the cameras are in the vicinity. So they would know by virtue of 200 feet of being within the intersection that there's a automated camera at that intersection. And then in addition to that, we added this language specifically to try and broaden the notification requirement to ensure that people know, particularly those that drive frequently through that intersection, that might live or work around the cameras, that the cameras are there. So, and also, again, it would only be upon a violation. So someone would have to be, running the red light or speeding through that intersection for them to get a warning.
There's also language elsewhere in the legislation that, in addition to all that, requires that the SLMPD, working in collaboration with streets and BPS, develop a public awareness campaign. I believe it's 60 days prior to the date that the first camera will go live. So it is a multi-pronged approach to make sure that there's as much awareness as possible. The specific kind of community outreach and engagement is not detailed to allow for the most flexibility and what that looks like. So that would be the additional public engagement component.
Okay. I think that kind of answer. I know that you say the signage would go. I'm just curious of will there be a appeals process of or how would the person know when the sign actually go up and the camera went up to say, hey, was it 30 days or not? That's just my thought process of it, but okay.
And I do want to note, it says in this text, the amendment, beginning on page 11, line 18, and then it says page 11, line 12. So that's just a Scribner's error. That's supposed to say line 18 as well.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, let's make that change, Madam Clerk, if you don't mind noting that.
So noted.
Thank you so much. Okay, did you have any further questions,
Not
Alderman?
at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And would that warning also go to only the person if they can tell who they are, or does it go to the owner of the car?
Correct. It will only go to the person if they can tell who they are.
Okay.
So that's, the bare minimum of the due process standards that we're working with, whether it is an alleged violation notice or citation, I should say, or if it is the warning. So that has to be the person we identify driving.
Great, thank you. That's important. Any further questions? Okay, amendment number 5.
Sure. Amendment number 5 adds in the requirement that in addition to the citation notice stating the speed over the limit, the driver was alleged to have traveled at the time of an alleged speed violation, that the information they are also provided includes the posted speed limit.
Any questions? Vice Chair Browning.
If someone were to proceed through a green light at 8, per hour, would camera detect and ticket that as well?
I think that would depend upon the eventual vendor that is selected. Right now, the way that this legislation is worded is it says a traffic violation, which includes a red light, yeah,
Red light, speeding.
Mike.
yeah. And the, yeah.
So speeding through,
Unfortunately, no one can hear you at home if it's not right into the mic.
Okay, well, I heard myself on the speakers here, but yes, depending upon the vendor and the equipment, but the president's office had also indicated that they've had conversations with many of the vendors, and they have the ability to simultaneously address both of those violations.
And they would be ticketed separately. Sorry for interrupting the question. That was probably what you were getting
that
at.
was my follow-up.
Yeah,
Correct.
we're casual here, the Pew Committee. Okay, anyone have any other questions here on Amendment 5? Seeing none, Amendment number 6, please.
Sure. So amendment number 6, in the committee substitute, there was, so in the bill is filed, there was existing section on assessment, and the committee substitute built in sort of an additional section dealing with assessment. So what amendment number 6 does is a few things, is that it pulls some of the assessment criteria added into the new section and puts it into the existing assessment portion. For example, some of the new language added in would require, and you can understand why this would be helpful information to have, the requirement that the SLMPD assess the reduction in vehicles committing traffic violations under this ordinance at intersections and locations where these cameras are placed. So that's something that certainly makes sense to be included in the existing assessment. And then there was an addition of a requirement that also that SLMPD assess the number of persons who have received 2 or more citations under this ordinance. There's already language in the assessment, the annual assessment requiring that SLMPD, to the extent that it can, provide anonymized information about the demographics of who is being issued citations under this ordinance, for example, their zip code, their race. So adding in the number of persons who've received 2 or more citations makes sense to include as part of the annual assessment process. And then the other piece that this would do is there was the addition of language requiring the city also track the total number of vehicles going through intersections at which these were placed. You know, it was, so this would remove that. I'm not sure that there's been communication in committee about that being part of this legislation. And by way of example, this is legislation to essentially issue, you know, citations to people who are alleged to have violated laws, not track in totality the number of vehicles going through our intersections. So this amendment would remove that language too.
Okay. Anyone have questions on this?
So just to put it in layman's terms, we're looking to gather data to determine the effectiveness of these measures, and also be able to track data like where the people who are violating the laws come from. So like I think it was Baltimore where they deployed this, and they found that most of the violations were coming from people who did not live in the city. And also found that there was a 15% reduction in crashes at the intersections where these were deployed. So this would allow us to get comparable data.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And similarly, to know where it's not working.
Right.
Yes, which is an important part of this too. You know, if it's not working, then that's data that needs to be gathered and considered, not just as part of where should cameras be placed or not be placed, but as part of the broader conversation about this program's efficacy.
Great. Alderman Aldridge, any questions?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Seeing no hands online, thank you. We'll move on to amendment number 7.
Sure, and then amendment number 7, really there's 2 big changes here. So this was language, again, part of the language discussing the efficacy assessment criteria. So instead of having that be a new section 10, just putting it into the existing assessment section 9, One other change you'll see proposed in this amendment is, so because the courts have clearly stated that SLMPD has to be in charge of managing this program, that's because it's quasi-criminal in nature. You'll see that instead of streets being the lead on the rule promulgation assessment and streets being the decider of what cameras are removed and when and how, it's SLMPD the lead on that, but SLMPD doing so in consultation with streets, with BPS, with ITSA, with the city councilor's office. So that's one of the changes. And then the second change is broadening the length of time for the promulgation of rules. One of the pieces of feedback that we've heard from the community, starting with last fall, was that the community does want to be involved in the conversation about, how is efficacy determined under this program. So broadening up to 120 days would just ensure that there is sufficient time to receive, accommodate, and incorporate any of that community feedback prior to the rules being promulgated.
Thank you. Any members of the committee have any questions on this one? Vice Chair Browning?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's a long.
a bit more complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to read through this. Can we get an idea of if this ordinance was passed out of the board by the end of the session? When would we expect to start seeing cameras, given the rules we're putting in place here?
Sure. So, the rules can go into place before a vendor is selected, right? And so in some ways, I hate to give the lawyer answer of it depends, but it would depend upon the identification selection of a vendor and then, how quickly they can move to get things implemented. We mentioned during the first committee hearing on this legislation that something the administration is working on is putting together a request for information, which is somewhat of a precursor to an RFP to try to get things moving on the back end as much as we can a little bit quicker. So hopefully that can expedite this process a little bit more. But yes, some of it depends upon, how quickly, that RFP is built out, which there's a lot of intentionality within this legislation about specifying those requirements up front, which should alleviate that burden. And then upon the, selection of that vendor, it would depend upon their capacity to get things moving fairly quickly. But certainly on the administration's side, I think once that vendor's been identified, we're very committed to, keeping this moving in an expeditious fashion.
Okay, thank you. So there's not a definitive answer on when we might this enforcement go into effect, but it sounds like you're taking all the urgency that this would require, given the delay in hearing these bills. And I've just heard a lot of questions from my communities that I represent about, when are we going to see this kind of thing? We see this kind of violence every day, people going in direction.
Yeah.
I know we're working diligently on it, so thank you for that answer. Yeah.
Yes.
Alderman Aldridge?
If you could just break these down a little bit. Okay, on the other side. And so the section 10, could you just explain the A, B, and C to me as like a kindergartner of what this would be doing? After 90 days, then the streets department has like 18 months to say if it's effective or not.
That's what's getting removed.
That's what's getting removed. Okay.
This system.
Yeah, so part of the thinking here was because Section 9 already provides for that annual assessment of efficacy and metrics rather than creating, rather than having there be this additional section also dealing with assessment of efficacy to keep it all in Section 9. So that's the initial thinking. And then if you look at, so we do try to make sure that we're incorporating everything that was proposed in the new Section 10 and Section 9. And so if you look at the old language of Section 10A1, that's the information that's being incorporated by the previous amendment in Section 9. So that assessment of the total number of vehicles, let's see, the reductions in the number of vehicle traffic violations, and the number of individuals who have received 2 more citations under this ordinance. So the new stuff in section, and the committee substitutes proposed section A1 is brought up into section 9. And then everything in A, B, and C is incorporated in the new language below, with the exception of the 18 months. The reason that the 18 months is not built in is because the assessment is already done on an annual basis in section 9. So thinking through and just trying to keep that, that assessment happening at a little bit of an earlier point in time. And so if you look at what was added in A, B, and C, so that had proposed the streets department working with the SLMPD, it's in city councilor's office to promulgate rules. So that's built into the new language. It's just that because the courts say SLMPD has to control this process, it's SLMPD working in coordination with streets and BPS and ITSA and city councilor's office to promulgate rules. Instead of the 90 days provided in the committee proposed section 10A, it's 120 days to promulgate those rules. And again, that's just more time for feedback from the, just given how many folks have reached out to engage on this issue. Looking at sections B and C of the proposed language, the evaluation there would be controlled by SLMPD instead of Streets Department. And then section C would provide that, as written, it would have provided that Streets Department can cause, if it determines that the automated camera enforcement system has been ineffective at improving traffic safely, that then it can cause the camera system to be removed or install additional traffic calming measures in compliance with the city's complete streets policy. So the way that is incorporated into the amendment, it's if part of the annual assessment, SLMPD in consultation with Streets Department and BPS determines that the automated camera system has been ineffective at reducing traffic violations as provided under the ordinance, or otherwise ineffective at improving traffic safety at the locations where those cameras are deployed, the SLMPD may remove the automated camera system. And in addition, the Streets Department may further recommend the installation of traffic calming measures at any of those locations, and those calming measures must align with the complete streets policy. So it's all being incorporated into section 9, just in slightly different ways, and making sure that to comply with the court guidance that SLMPD has to manage this, that SLMPD is taking lead, but is acting in consultation with Streets and BPS and ITSA and those folks.
I guess, what was the thought of having SLMPD, St. Louis Public Police Department, be the management kind of individual who would be able to move the cameras compared to Streets, who actually specialize in like traffic safety? Because so SLMPD would already be doing the writing of the tickets, enforcement. So, but they'll be doing the enforcement and the management of the whole process. So I'm curious, what was the idea of them and not Streets, who are that department kind of specialize in traffic safety and lighting and such things like that?
Sure, that's a great question. And the answer is it's what the courts have told us we have to do. So an automated camera enforcement system is quasi-criminal in nature. And as part of the case law that originated on this topic from, I believe it was 2010 through 2017, one of the pieces of guidance that came out of this was SLMPD has a police force, not specifically SLMPD, but because this is an exercise of the city's police power, that SLMPD, for our purposes, must manage all aspects of this system. And so when it comes to not just the enforcement side, but the actual management, the issuing of the RFP, or even taking the lead on the decisions about placement and whatnot, that is what our courts have told us where that control lies.
Gotcha. Just to be clear, that is what the court said we have to do. Is it has to be the law enforcement agency who is managing this.
Because this is a city's exercise of its police power. Yes.
Okay. And then if it is found to be not an efficient area and they want to move cameras, I think we kind of answered this already, and they want to move the camera, I don't know, 4 blocks up, that would fall back under that 30-day kind of grace period for a new camera being placed. So if somebody run the red light, they wouldn't get a citation because it was moved and relocated, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
That would be considered a new placement, not just moving. Thank you. So they would be given a warning because that would be considered a new installation, not just moving from one location to another.
Okay. And then and is there somewhere, is that defined like new installation in the bill, or do we just talk about it? And
I didn't hear that.
I said, did we define new installation, or did we just talk about it in the bill? I wasn't sure if it was defined. And we can, that's a question we can get to a little later too, but.
Well, section 2.
No, so this would be the amendment, this would be the next amendment we
Okay.
consider, so I can.
Great.
So this is going to be, this would be the next amendment we consider, but to talk a little bit about what that language would say to update what was proposed in the committee substitute. So the committee substitute proposed including the warning notices under prosecution. And because a warning notice is a separate thing from a prosecution, the recommendation in this amendment is to create a new section called warning notices. And what would happen, what this says, to answer your question, is for alleged traffic violations occurring within the first 30 days after an automated camera enforcement system has begun operating in a particular location. And so that is how we get to the answer to your question, which is when an automated camera enforcement system has been operating in a particular location.
Okay.
Okay, so you went over a little bit about Amendment number 8, but just to keep people at folks, unless anyone has anything else on Amendment 7? No? Okay. Amendment 8, you were beginning to go over that. You can just sum it up again, just so that people.
Sure,
talk about.
yeah. So one of the additions to this legislation was adding in, again, a bit of a grace period for the first 30 days after a automated camera is installed at a new location, new intersection, what have you, in the city, and making sure that that wording is, making sure that that wording allows for this to be issued as a warning with no prosecution attaching. So with the current language, if a notice of violation is issued to drivers, that comes attendant with a citation number that is then provided to the court. So the preference being, and the way to do this being to avoid that process entirely by providing for a warning notice. And you see language built out in the suggested language for Amendment number 8 stating, warning notices shall not be issued as traffic citations and shall not be entered enforcement ticketing or mobile ticketing systems for prosecutions. Warning notices shall not result in a conviction or fine for the alleged traffic offense. So being as specific as we possibly can about, this is not a prosecution. It's not to be treated this way. It is intended to be that grace period.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, Amendment number 9, please.
Sure. One of the proposals in the committee substitute was language stating that the vendor is prohibited from participating in any capacity in the enforcement or prosecution of traffic violations. So this would update that to ensure that the vendor is able to do that as required under the ordinance, right? Because they have to participate in the enforcement prosecution in order to satisfy due process requirements. They have to produce the data, the images that they collect. And so this is just updating that verbiage to account for that. And so what it would say is the vendors prohibited from participating in any capacity in the enforcement traffic violations except as otherwise provided for in this ordinance, including providing all live testimony, records, affidavits, and any other requirement to establish the foundation for admission into evidence of photographs, images, or video from unattended cameras operating pursuant to this ordinance at the trial of traffic violations under this ordinance and as provided for in Section 5F of this ordinance. So it's just making sure that they're doing all the things that they have to do legally in order for us to be able to have an automated camera enforcement system.
Thank you. So this is when the placement of commas is tough. Would it mean in order to meet the except as otherwise provided for in this ordinance, would we have to remove that comma? Because if we have that as a clause, this is my 8th grade English. If we have that as a separate clause, it refers back to the clause before, correct?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think that
Okay.
that would be a very
So we
well-
need to strike the comma after the word ordinance. Would you accept a friendly amendment?
Sure.
Thank you. Because what it says now is that they can't do anything to enforce any traffic violations.
that,
If
that's
with
very
that
well-
comma. Okay, let's get rid of that comma.
And one thing I mentioned too as part of this is, so folks in this room are aware, and this committee are aware, and who are watching are aware. This is how our environmental operations, cameras function, where, that it's the silent witness doctrine where the camera itself can't testify. And so you have all this information that it gathers that it has to produce, as part of the court record in prosecutions for environmental operations like dumping and whatnot. So just by way of illustration, how this is already in practice in other aspects of city enforcement.
Okay. So they're providing this to the person who's actually saying that did. Here's
Yes.
evidence, here's the photo, I can confirm this is, and that's a SLMPD officer of some sort doing
Yes,
that
that's correct.
determination.
Yep, because the chain of custody is, evidentiary-wise, the management is through SLMP, so they would have the officer, who has reviewed, who has signed off, be present, at any court proceeding to say, this is how the system works. Yeah, here is, the information it collects, and then that information ideally will be presented in visual form within, the courts as part of that prosecution.
I just really want to make sure that we're saying that the vendor cannot. I want to make sure that we're saying the vendor can do what they need to do to carry out this ordinance, but can't do anything that carries out anything else that's not in this. Do we feel in agreement with that comma going away, or do you feel
Yes,
like it
I think
has-
the removal of the comma certainly accommodates that. And I think that if this continues to be a concern, there's a minor tweak that could need to happen on the floor.
I think Alderwoman, even just the first, part of that statement and the amendment, the vendor is prohibited for participating in any capacity in the enforcement of traffic violations except for it. So I think it does address that concern in terms of, prohibiting them from using this for other purposes, except for the enforcement of violations.
Would it make sense to take out the word traffic from the first part? So that's enforcement of any violation, because we want to make sure that this isn't being used for any other purpose besides the traffic violation. So this one seems to be kind of
I think that that language was used specifically because we have definitions for traffic violation.
okay. I'm good with it. If you are, I just want to ask the questions there.
I would be fine with traffic being removed from that particular statement, but I think the reason that was there is because to be consistent with the rest of the language in the bill.
And it does line out in various other places in the bill that this is for traffic violations.
Correct.
This doesn't override any other portion of the bill to say you can't, right? Okay, any other members that go ahead.
Specifically enumerates what types of traffic violations that are eligible for the program as well.
Great, thank you. Any other members of the committee have questions on this amendment? Seeing none, amendment number 10.
Okay, and this is a appropriations tweak, updating the language to reflect that monies will be distributed by the treasurer rather than the court. So it currently reads with monies distributed by the court according to law, and would instead say distributed to the city treasurer according to law and dispersed by the treasurer according to law.
Okay, any questions with this? This is just the way it works and we're lining it out. This is one of those legal and operational
Yes.
amendments. Okay. general discussion on the amendments. If any members of the committee have any amendments they'd like to vote on separately, or if you're okay voting as a whole, if any members of the committee have anything they'd like to say at this time. Vice Chair Browning?
We're still going to have questions on the general bill.
Right, so what we have options right now. We can take up these amendments one by one. We can vote to adopt them all together. I'm going to have Madam Clerk nodding along as I go. We're going to vote to adopt them one by one. We're going to vote to adopt them all together. We cannot take a vote yet and hear public comment before we take the amendments, but my assumption is that people who are here to talk generally on the bill as it will be voted on today, so may want to wait until after we've had a chance to look at the amendments in front of us. No one's giving me any feedback here, so I'm going to assume that I'm right. Then if any members of the committee have any amendments they'd like to vote on separately, we can do that. Otherwise, we could all of them together. Any members of the committee have any feedback here?
I think we can vote on them together.
Okay. Any other feedback, Alderman Aldridge?
I think I'm fine with voting them together. I'm just fleshing out Amendment 7 and Amendment 9. I know as we talked about the vendor, like how can we just put stronger language, maybe that like ensure enforcement that they won't be using, they literally be prohibited from just doing what they're supposed to do. I don't know. Like I say, I kind of just wish maybe it was stronger language or a penalty if they are found doing such of providing that data or information somehow, and we find out, or I guess SLMPD will find out, which I guess they will be monitoring themselves a little bit. And then, yeah, I guess just with Amendment 7, this don't have to be now. It'll be nice just to get that state statute of what legally that SLMPD has to be the enforcement and they're the enforcement, they're the oversight, and they are the traffic safety kind of individual.
Any questions on? Oh, wonderful. Judge McCoy, welcome. Would you like to come up and speak?
So just to be clear, we're focusing on amendment number 7 here.
Right now, I believe we're talking about amendment 7.
Yeah. Good morning.
Please introduce yourself. Thank you.
My name is Newton McCoy. I'm the administrative judge at St. Louis City Municipal Court.
Wonderful. Please continue.
Okay.
I think Alderman Aldridge has some questions for you.
Yeah, I mean, first off, thanks for being here, Judge. One of the best judges we got in the city, and you just do a great job. Thank you for all your service. I guess my question, and I don't know the lawsuit in and out of why it was ruled unconstitutional, and I know Ms. Milberg, and I know Alderman Cone has been doing, like, dotting his I's and crossing his T's to make sure that we don't fall into a legal trap again, but to be able to elaborate and speak on why the police department have to be the enforcement and management of the traffic cameras is, I guess, my curiosity.
Well, from my point of view, these tickets, the citations that come from camera enforcement, one of the reasons that the prior program was invalidated was that the Supreme Court determined there had to be points assessed. So if you're going to have a citation where if a person is found guilty, that's going to be reported to the State Department of Revenue, and they're going to receive points against their driver's record for that. That is something that a commissioned officer should be making the decision as to whether the case is going to be issued or not. In terms of structure, in our prosecution of any citation, it has to come through, at least under our current technology, the ticketing system that the St. Louis Police Department has. That is because it has to go through a prosecution case management system, which puts it in shape to be accepted into the state case management system. We're just now going through adopting the state's case management system, turning us upside down, actually. And so this is the flow that traffic citations have now, but most important, this is a point of offense if a person is found guilty of this.
Okay, so I get that. That sounds like more of enforcement compared to, like, I guess, deployment of where these would go. Yeah, the administrative.
And I'm not able to address the management of it. I don't have firsthand knowledge of the management of the system other than the review of the video, whatever you have in terms of video, photos. If a speed camera utilizes a Doppler laser principle, all those determinations as to whether or not a violation has been shown and whether or not a citation would be needs to be made by a commissioned police officer. I think actually if they're going to have speed cameras, there might be some additional DOT training that might be required.
And I would add, Alderman, and perhaps Ms. Milberg can elaborate on this as well. But again, I think it goes to, and this has been, as you're aware, a great debate with respect to both the board bill, the committee substitute, and now the amendments, as to like who would be able to control the placement, removal, et cetera, of these. It's the administration's perspective that because this is part of our policing authority underneath state statute, that the police department would be the one that's responsible for the implementation, the administration of the program. And I don't know if you have anything further.
Sure. I do want to highlight to the question about language ensuring that.
Yeah, that's 9. We can get to that. I'm still on 7. So just so the installation and deployment would be the department, or would that be, there'll be the police department, or there'll be streets?
Police department working in, and the language says that they shall do so in conjunction with streets, with BPS. IT, it's Information Technology Services Agency.
But they'll be the ones who, I guess, would make the decision of the installation and deployment. Are you saying they'll?
So they'll work together, and then like the final, like if there's a signature on a piece of paper, the end result of all that, it would be an authorizing individual within the Esalen PD.
Okay. And I think the judge did a really good job, and also as well as Alderman Cone and Celeste, Ms. Milberg, explaining it. Like I think I'm just still wrapped up on, I'm not seeing the dots being connected to the management part of it being. I get the enforcement. I think the judge talked about that as, they're the ones who have to write the citations, and they have to, add the points to people license. That makes sense. That's kind of in their preview. But I guess the management piece is still not connecting with me, but that's okay at the moment, I guess.
And what I'm happy to do is I'm happy to put together the review of the case law that we've been relying upon for that and share that with you and the other members of the committee.
That would be helpful. I know we've cited case law and other things. Having it ahead of time would have been helpful.
I do remember that being a discussion when the cameras were thrown out in St. Louis, is that there wasn't an officer reviewing it. It was part of the reason that it was thrown out, because a camera was charging you as opposed to a person. So I feel like I understand. I remember that being part of the conversation. So thank you for explaining that further. Vice Chair Browning, any questions on amendment number 7?
No questions. Thank you.
Okay. You said you had more on amendment number 9 before we vote?
No, I think I was just saying it would be, and I know you was about to explain something real quick on 9. I was just wondering if there could have been stronger language around the vendors to ensure that they're truly prohibited from doing anything outside of the evidence of photos, images, and video. I know we got the comma worked out.
So, Alderman, there's also a section of the bill that is specific to vendor prohibition. So on page 9 of the committee substitute, section E, it enumerates the different prohibitions, and underneath 1C, it goes on.
So now you said page 9?
And 1D as well. So on page 10, it starts on page 9, okay. Section E, vendor prohibitions, but continues on to page 10, and item D, 1D, is any purpose for any other purpose than the implementation and administration of the city's automated camera enforcement program. So that is specifically enumerated that they would not be able to utilize these programs for anything other than what's specified in the board bill.
Got it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think this strengthens that section. Thank you. Okay, would we be ready to vote on all of these together? or
I
would
have a
you-
question. I have a
Oh,
question.
Alderman, I did not see your hand. Thank you so much for chiming up.
Thank you, thank you. So I'm just trying to make sure that I understand. So in addition to the fine that would be paid, for the violation, now it also would assess points towards your driver's license.
One of the reasons that the prior program was invalidated was that all the citations promised there would be no points in every case, and you ought to go ahead and plead guilty and pay it and do it right away. So one of the problems that the Supreme Court found is that state law requires that if you run a stoplight, if you run a stop sign, and you're found guilty of that, that points are assessed. And so that was one of the specific reasons that the prior program was invalidated. And so it's necessary for that charge, if you're convicted of that original charge, to carry points. That doesn't preclude the city councilor from making amendments like they do in any other traffic violation, if that seems appropriate to them. But the notion is that as much as possible, except for the use of unattended camera evidence, that these citations should be treated as an on-view citation would be.
Okay, any further questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Any further questions from anyone else? Okay, Alderman Cohen, is it your preference to have us vote on these amendments or hear from the public first?
I think that we've, with the adoption of the committee substitute and the presentation of the amendments, that there's a pretty significant amount of information that's been shared. I think, giving the public the opportunity to testify if they choose to.
Before we vote on the amendments?
Correct.
Okay, that's fine with me. I do want to acknowledge we have some written comment that was passed out in opposition to the board bill. Madam Clerk, are there people signed up to speak?
Yes, I have a few speakers, 1 online and 4 in person.
Is it all in opposition or a mix or?
Opposition.
All in opposition? Okay. Then let's have everyone raise their hand who's planning on speaking. So Madam Clerk, are you all in at once? Okay, we've got 5 I see in the room and 1 in on Zoom who I can't see their hands. We may have to swear them in separately. But Madam Clerk, will you please swear in the people who have their hands raised now?
If you'll raise your right hand for me. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay, I'll begin with Wilcox.
Wonderful. Do you mind you to say your name, zip code, or ward? And you have 3 minutes. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. My name is Chris Wilcox. I live in the 14th Ward. I'm here to ask the committee to not pass Board Bill 105. These cameras are both more expensive and less effective than alternative traffic safety infrastructure. Even signs that display driver speeds, for example, with no enforcement attached to them are just as effective, not more so, than at changing driver behavior. Fines and fees also have a disparate impact on race and income. The fines are likely not even to deter higher income drivers, whether or not they live in the city. Also, we already have a vast network of police surveillance in St. Louis. I don't support adding more. We've discussed today explicitly that the police department will be in charge of the placement and use of the cameras. You can be sure they will be placed to target Black drivers in neighborhoods as well as has consistently been the case in the past. We've talked previously about the good idea of moving traffic away from the police department. This is a significant step in the opposite direction. Also, regardless of the intentions with the footage, the city doesn't necessarily decide how it's going to be used. We have persistent threats from the state government, including state local control of the police department. In addition, if the state succeeds in criminalizing interstate travel for people using their right to an abortion, expect that footage for these cameras to be subpoenaed for that purpose. The best way to increase traffic safety is to change the built environment and invest in public transit. We should not increase police surveillance more than we already have, and we should not hand the state even more tools to use against city residents. I ask the committee not pass Board Bill 150. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Mr. John Kashnoff.
Mr. Chasnoff, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me here today. Appreciate being here. I'm John Chasnoff. So I agree with the comments that were just made and really do oppose this bill philosophically and think it's really not the most effective approach. But assuming that it's going to pass, I wanted to get into some details that I think need improving. First, I wanted to support Alderman Aldridge's concern about the police managing this system. So when stop signs come before the board, you all decide where stop signs might be placed, and that doesn't go through the police department. To my understanding, they don't make those decisions as much as you all do. So I think there is a case to be made for separating out the management of this from the enforcement. Secondly, there's a clause that says who has access to these tapes, and it doesn't include defense attorneys. So I think defense attorneys need to be able, even if it's providing an alibi for someone, maybe they were getting a red light ticket when they're supposed to have been committing a crime somewhere else. I think we need to open up the access of this to defense attorneys. There's also contradictions in the bill. The way I understand it, I haven't seen the committee substitute, so a lot of what I'm saying is provisional. I think that's unfortunate, but I think there's contradictions in the bill where it says in some places that vendor employees have access to the system to do repairs and implementation, but in other places it limits access to authorized employees who are only police department employees. So I think you all need to clear up that contradiction so we make sure that vendor can get in there and repair the system. But my larger concern has to do with the fact that it still says in the bill, to my understanding, that these are not necessarily red light cameras. It says that they can be activated by red light cameras, by red lights, or other methods. So it's really opened up to any reason that the police department decides to activate these cameras. And then despite, I think, the sponsor's best efforts, there's still a provision in there that says that the police can investigate any crime. So it's still not limited to traffic enforcement. So what we're really doing here is just adding on to the Real-Time Crime Center's vast and growing number of surveillance cameras around the city without any limitations. So for instance, I would suggest that we have a provision in there that says that if they're going to use it for other than traffic purposes, they should have a warrant and be able to show probable cause. Some kind of limitation so that this is just not opening up more and more cameras. And we don't know the number of cameras from this bill, so it's an unlimited number of cameras adding to the system for basically any purpose. I know that the courts...
Finish the sentence, please, and then I think you've hit your limit.
I'll finish this thought. The courts have said that we don't have, privacy on the streets, but we do have stalker laws. You can look at me on the street, but you can't follow me around. And as we increase the number of cameras throughout the city, including the ones in this bill, I think we're creating a situation where the government is stalking us as we move about the city. And I'm not comfortable with that. A regular stalker doesn't have the powers that the government has.
Thank you, Mr. Chasnoff. I did give you a little bit more time.
Okay.
That's a lot of ands to make that a run-on sentence. I appreciate that. Okay, next person, please.
Rachel Hurtado.
Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks. Does this work? Okay. My name is Rachel Hurtado. I live in Ward 7 and I work downtown. I'm testifying in opposition to Board Bill 105 today. I'd also like to raise a few specific concerns about this bill. First, I'm extremely concerned about the proposed self-funded nature of this system. Data from other cities clearly demonstrates that the massive overhead cost of maintaining these red light cameras. We know that a major risk of a self-funded system is the motivation to both meet an unspoken or unofficial quota of fines to fulfill the budget to maintain the system itself, and to increase the number of tickets and fines to grow the system's budget to install cameras, regardless of the system's efficacy. This bill should include some kind of cap for the amount of revenue that is directed back into the system versus how much revenue is directed into the accompanying fund. We all know the huge costs of streets infrastructure, and given the high cost of just routine maintenance of the camera system, it's unlikely that the fund would accumulate those large amounts of money needed to create non-criminalizing infrastructure. St. Louisans have been asking for the city to invest in pedestrian-safe traffic calming measures for decades, and we deserve more than the leftovers of a criminalizing surveillance system. I also want to again raise the concern of the technology that the vendor will use to identify the driver. Facial recognition technology and AI-powered software is racist, often misidentifying and over-criminalizing Black people. Residents need to know exactly what technology the vendor selected would use to identify drivers without facial recognition software or AI, and this bill needs to explicitly prohibit any future use of facial recognition technology. Another concern I have is that the RFP language is asking for the vendor's ability to send violation notices. There's a myriad of concerns if the city is giving a private third-party company the responsibility to send these notices rather than it be municipal tickets signed off on by a prosecutor. Because of the wide scope of vendor responsibilities in the bill as is, it's also crucial that language be added to the prohibited use section to specify that the violations will not be issued to drivers when the light turns red while the driver's already in the middle of the intersection. That's City Ordinance 304.120.6. We all understand that pedestrian and traffic safety is the top priority of community members and elected officials alike, and recent incidences have made this priority feel even more urgent. I encourage the members of this committee to resist the pressure of that urgency to pass legislation that relies on criminalization for enforcement. We want less surveillance and more front-end investment on creative safety infrastructure. I urge you all to vote no on Board Bill 105 as is, and as you continue to work on this bill, make these changes to narrow the scope and curb the power of this surveillance tool that will absolutely trap more and more poor, working class, Black and brown St. Louisans into the criminal legal system. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next, please.
Tammy Buford or Bufford?
Ms. Buford, welcome.
Hello, my name is Tammy Bufford. I'm a resident of the 3rd Ward, and I'm here to oppose Board Bill 105. This bill is just a poor excuse for public safety. We have already found that these red light cameras have been unconstitutional, yet we're bringing them back to criminalize Black and brown communities. The infrastructure that we currently have will not support the system, so it's just adding additional cost to our city where we could be putting that money into better preparing our streets for our homeless community. There's so many other things that we could be investing in to provide real public safety that we're not doing. There's just a lack of creating traffic safety. There's a lot of racial profiling with the placement of these cameras and punitive damages rather than preventative. The system is just unaccountable. There's just more surveillance that's going to be put on our citizens and not enough to provide any safety. These red light cameras will not stop people from running red lights. It will not provide any type of safety for us. It will actually cause more people to have accidents because they're stopping more abruptly and people are running into the back of them. So I urge the board to say no on this bill as written and come up with better solutions for traffic safety.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Willie Boyd.
There's so many questions still.
Yeah, that's the problem. We'll never answer everyone's questions.
My name is Willie Boyd. I'm out the 14th Ward. I oppose the parts of the bill that deals with the funding. Everybody know that the North Side has been an underdeprived area due to racism. And if it's going to be funded by corporations that's gonna benefit from the profits coming from the red light cameras. I think the North Side residents should get the lion's share of those profits. And I agree with John Chestnut in his position of the privacy concerns also with these red light cameras. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. Next, please.
That concludes our public speaking. The online guests signed off.
You're trying to get the person online. Sorry, I missed what you just
He
said.
signed off. I'm sorry.
Okay, so is that it for?
That's the conclusion of our public speaking.
Okay. Alderman Cohen, I'll give you, do you need a few minutes? Are you ready? Sure. I appreciate everyone who came to speak today. I know that that's taking time out of your day is tough, and so to come to speak to a committee, it's very appreciated. I learned a lot and wrote down several questions that you all brought up that I will be asking. So. Alderman Cohn.
Thank you, Madam. What's that?
So care to share?
You.
Thank you very much. Please continue.
So I do really, want to thank everyone for their time this morning as we talked through both the committee substitute and the proposed amendments here. What I would ask is that since the amendments were just submitted this morning, that we go ahead and take a vote on the committee substitute, and then I will convene a meeting with the president's office, the mayor's office, and other stakeholders to talk through the amendments.
Okay.
And we'll probably have a floor substitute since there were 10 amendments and there might be some additional ones subsequent to the meeting. I think it would probably be prudent to go ahead and pass Board Bill number 105 committee substitute as is, and then I will deal with the amendments.
Are there any of these amendments that you want to take up? None of them.
I think if I'm going to go the route of doing a floor substitute, it might as well just be prudent and, you know.
But these are the amendments that you'll be discussing to the legality and operational parts of it that need to be updated, because there's definitely a lot in here that is legal and operational. Right. Okay, and you want to get that right.
Depending upon the conversations, it may be a floor substitute or it may just be some amendments. But if we maintain 10 amendments, I would hate to do that to everyone on the floor of the board. So certainly would do my best to ensure that we either reduce the number of amendments or we come forward with a floor substitute from that conversation.
Okay. Any discussion from members of the committee? So I think there were some questions that for me were brought up during the public comment. If people wanted to ask any questions, if there's a case against someone and they're in court, their attorney would be able to have access to all the documents, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so defense attorneys would have access to all of the documents that we're providing. Okay, correct, thank you. Will the vendor be able to get into the system to share it? And they will be able to make access that way? The bill provides for that with the committee substitute?
That is one of the amendments that we proposed today, yes.
Okay, and what amendment is it? Do you, off the top?
I don't recall which number in particular, but it was one of the amendments that we were addressing today.
Okay.
To ensure that they have the ability to go in and.
I just like to answer people's questions as they have them, you know. I believe, from my interpretation of the committee substitute, that the bill refers only to the traffic violations specifically mentioned, and there is no allowed use of these traffic enforcement cameras for anything outside of what the bill mentions. That feels to me that it's been mentioned numerous times in the bill. Is that correct?
I'm not sure where that narrative has come from, but you're absolutely correct, Chairwoman. There, it is specifically stated throughout the board bill that these cameras are to be used for specific traffic violations. The board bill specifically states which types of violations. So it's not every single type of traffic violation. It's basically 3 traffic violations. So the cameras themselves are only supposed to be used for that purpose. So that's both spelled out in the enabling language for what the purpose of the equipment is for, and then it's also spelled out specifically in vendor prohibitions in terms of what data can and cannot be used for.
Okay. And then it was also brought up in that same way, because of that limitation, there would be no access to these cameras for any other case or any other legal citation.
That's
okay,
correct.
that's what you just said. Great. The questions about funding this program, like any program that we fund, are very valid. You know, when you talk about are the tickets from this we have in Board Bill 106, which we haven't discussed yet, the ability for the funds to cover the implementation of this, which Vice Chair Browning did lay out some places where this has been seen a reduction in traffic accidents and traffic violence. So it is definitely a mechanism at which we can control some of these things, or attempt to.
If I may, I believe, and when this program was first in place, I was appalled that the money that was collected from the citations went directly into our general revenue fund. So when this was of discussion, before I even introduced both Board Bill 105 and 106, the proposal was to do just that, to have the revenue go into our general revenue account. It's one of the reasons why I amended it. Well, I didn't amend it because it hadn't been introduced yet, but created the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Improvement Fund, because I think that when we're talking about addressing these types of situations, we also need to address how can we avoid these situations in the beginning. And so the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Improvement Fund is intended to help with that. There's not enough money in the world to improve everything that we need to do with respect to this. I think during the initial conversation we had with both of these board bills, I referenced the kind of 3 E's, including in that our engineering and education. So our infrastructure and being able to provide programs to help people understand how, 1, dangerous vehicles can be, and 2, how to operate them on our streets is critical. And so the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Improvement Fund, which is Board Bill 106, does just that. The revenue that's collected from this program isn't going to continue to perpetuate a police state. It's designed and intended to help curtail the behavioral traits that contribute to the unsafe environment that we're living in. And so the program, when established, would help fund driver's education courses with our St. Louis Public Schools, and it would also help to provide infrastructure improvements specifically within our neighborhoods. These programs, the red light, speeding cameras, the automated camera enforcement, these are largely going to be on place in our major arterial streets, not on our neighborhood streets, because they require fiber optic cables and things of that nature that are only located on those major arterial streets unless there's a significant infrastructure upgrade to allow them to go to our neighborhood streets. And so I think that by using funds to help improve outcomes in our neighborhood streets and then also address education on the front end, it certainly makes, in my opinion, the bill a better bill.
Having that companion piece, okay. And then the piece about the vendor sending the ticket. Can you clarify a little bit about that process of the ticket being issued?
So the vendor would not be sending the tickets because...
That was a comment that was made. I'm just clarifying.
Oh, okay. I thought we had already clarified that in our remarks earlier, but that was part of the old program. The vendor sent the tickets directly to the vehicle owner, not the vehicle operator. So that is something that is different with Board Bill 105. And that's part of the reason why the mayor's office contends that it needs to be managed through the police department, because the police would be the ones that are sending the citation.
I think the comment made was about the RFP process, saying that the vendor should be able to do that. But it wouldn't say that the vendor is doing that. It's just laid out in the RFP. There was a comment made about the racial profiling component, and I think that's a really important one. The review that's baked into this bill that's one of the things that would be part of that review. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think, 2 points on that. One is part of the discussions around, equity and justice also involve lowering the interactions that police have with individuals. And these types of programs specifically do limit the one-on-one interactions that individuals would have with a police officer on the street. The cameras would be there to ensure that there's quote unquote compliance with our law. And therefore, people won't be pulled over by a police officer, potential for conflict to occur in that situation. So I think that this one addresses that situation. And then two, the bill specifically enumerates a process for evaluation of the placement of these cameras. So after, I believe it's 18 months, there's an evaluation process that would be undertaken, through the city to ensure that, we're evaluating efficacy of these. And there's certainly some items that were, spelled out in terms of how that would work. But not limited to those. So if something is not working, and there's some debate on, what is effective, and one of the conversations that I had over the last several weeks while we were talking about that is, just because one camera might see an increase in the number of tickets that are going through, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's ineffective. And one of the examples that I use during those conversations is the NGA. Right now, if there were a camera placed up near the NGA, traffic count isn't going to be, it might be, 1,000, 2,000 cars per day. Once the NGA goes there and there's 5,000 people going to work every day for their jobs, well, 5,000 people means that there could be the potential for increased violations that happen at those intersections surrounding that. Similarly, that would take place anywhere that there's population gains or population shifts throughout our city. So I don't think just purely evaluating on the effectiveness of this based off of the number of citations is a true and accurate representation of whether or not they're effective. There's other criteria that we can be utilizing, whether that's a percentage, or the number of repeat offenders that go through those intersections. So all of those things are enumerated as well.
Thank you for that. I see Alderwoman Keys has her hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I do have a question. I thought I heard you say, and this is directed to Alderman Cone, that St. Louis Public Schools would be conducting the I guess road safety or whatever driving classes. Is that correct?
It's not, so that's part of Board Bill 106 is funding driver's education courses, and there's actually a grant provided through the state of Missouri, which the administration applied for. So it would be in partnership with SLPS. I don't know if SLPS would specifically be the ones conducting the course, but it would be in partnership with SLPS.
So I'm not quite clear. So you said you weren't sure that SLPS would be conducting the courses. So if they're not conducting the courses, how could you be in partnership with them?
Well, so there's third parties that could be providing the course itself, and then SLPS would be providing lists of students that would be eligible for those, and that the city would essentially sponsor or provide grants for them to participate in those courses. That's one option, Alderwoman. But, as I mentioned, first, that's part of 106, Board Bill 106, not Board Bill 105, which we're discussing right now. So I'd be happy to have that conversation when we're on Board Bill 106.
Yeah, well, the reason I mean, when you mentioned 106 and you mentioned you kind of opened the door. So since the door was open, I figured I'd walk on in. So yeah, I'll be happy to talk about this when we get to 106. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Keys. I know I have two folks left with questions. We'll go to Vice Chair Browning and then back to Alderman.
Thank you. Alderman Cohn, I want to thank you for your thoughtfulness and thoroughness in putting together this proposal, and anyone else who helped you put this together. I think this has been written in a way that tries to avoid the adverse effects that can result from enforcement. And as I understand the concerns, that there's always the potential for that adverse effect, but we've, you and anyone else that's been involved in this has really tried to make sure that this is tailored to a specific problem and really trying to prevent what are the effects of lack of enforcement, which is behavior that ends up in harm to our communities and results in loss for our city, not just in terms of safety, but in terms of our ability to attract businesses, to attract residents, to attract visitors. We've seen traffic violence headlines every single week this year, and it is heartbreaking. So I appreciate the time and effort you put into this bill. I just have a few questions. I didn't see it in the bill, and I don't expect to see it in the bill, but do you know how much tickets are for running a red light and getting caught by one of these cameras?
I believe underneath the old program it was $100 a citation, but there's actually a court mandated fee schedule or fine schedule that was provided during the, I don't have it handy.
Excuse me, Judge McCoy. I would love to hear your answer to this,
Yeah,
but you have to come up to the mic if you're
During the first
just
hearing.
as we can all hear you.
During the first hearing, there was a schedule that
1 second, sir.
that's based off of state courts and fines per violation.
So these are mostly what we call minor traffic violations. So under SB 5, post-Ferguson legislation, most of them are going to be subject to a cap of $225 total combined fine and court cost. These particular offenses are not on the state uniform fine collection schedule because there has been a decision up to this point not to include photo enforcement tickets in the cases that can be paid out of court. That could be subject to change should the Uniform Fine Committee decide to do it, but right now the cap on these things would be $225 combined fine and court cost.
And when you say the cap, does that mean that if there's an additional violation, it can't go above 225? Like if there's speeding as well?
The rule is that if the speeding is 19 miles an hour or over the speed limit, then it becomes a non-minor traffic violation, and it could be subject to a higher fine up to $500. That's the maximum of our jurisdiction. But anything that is 4 points or under, or doesn't involve an accident, or doesn't have a speed of 19 miles over, is going to be subject to the $225 cap as a minor traffic violation.
But it's asking if someone goes through, like runs a red light and is speeding, would they get two separate violations? And is that subject to the cap, or is it two
Well, no,
separate caps?
each separate citation would be separately subject to the cap. It's not combined. In other words, all the tickets that are issued in a particular, on the street, on view, on a particular stop are separate tickets. It would be the same way if the evidence is provided by the camera rather than the police officers on view testimony.
Okay, thank you. And just to be clear, you could avoid all these things by simply not running a red light, correct?
That's correct.
Great. And can the data from the cameras be used to direct police to intersections of concern? So, for instance, if somebody is routinely running a red light at an intersection, let's just say Kings Highway and Delmar, because that's an intersection in my ward that I have personally witnessed multiple cars running every day. If there are cars that are running that and they have temp tags and we are unable to identify the driver due to tinted windows or anything, can the data from these cameras be used to direct police to those intersections to enforce the law in person?
I guess my answer to that would be the cameras themselves could not direct that. You know, it would be the police department in terms of their evaluation practices and determining public safety, and also their staffing and availability to be able to address those types of situations. Is the data there? Yes, it would be there.
Understandable. There's one of the criticisms I hear is that this will only catch law-abiding drivers who have correct tags and current license plates. And while I would disagree that you're law-abiding if you're running a red light or speeding, I also would point out that we should not avoid taking a measure just because it won't solve the problem completely. And so I'll highlight that not only is the next bill that we're going to hear, 106, the Traffic Improvement Fund, which I think is fantastic as well, we'll be putting that money back into making our streets safer, but we're also going to be hearing Complete Streets today, which is another effort to make sure that the engineering side of this equation is being given the attention that it needs. And that's not the end of that either. We're going to continue to look at how we can make our streets safer. So this is definitely a both and situation and not depending on just cameras to fix the problem. I have no more questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alderman Aldridge has questions.
Thank you. One quick question, then a comment. I know it was brought up during the comment section. I guess, will these cameras be tied, since the department will be managing and enforcement, will these cameras also be tied to the real-time intelligence center, or?
In terms of it's not a quote-unquote surveillance camera, so it's used for a specific purpose, so the data would be shared with the police department, but in terms of it being quote-unquote monitored in the real-time intelligence center, I don't believe so.
Okay.
Because they're just taking photos at those intersections. It's not a live stream of the intersection.
Okay, so it only, I guess, it's kind of maybe like a body camera to only go off when activated from running a red light or some type of traffic violation.
Correct.
Okay. And then to a comment, I do also want to echo, Alderman Cone, I know you've been working hard on this piece of legislation for a very long time. I know we've had some conversations about it, and there's definitely no doubt that our city has a traffic problem. And I think our chairwoman has definitely brought up a lot of times how we need to do more traffic safety measures. We have a lot of wide streets, especially in Northside, where we talk about traffic incidents and deaths and stuff. We see a higher amount of that in North St. Louis than throughout the rest of the city. And I think that's why this conversation is so important. I don't think nobody is not saying we don't want to make our streets safe, but I think as we continue to hear from the community, two people from my ward, it's also how do we do something that doesn't disproportionately affect one part of our city than the other. So I know it's, we definitely can walk and chew gum, but we also should be very cautious when we are, making decisions on something that could, again, disproportionately affect one group of people just because we want safer streets. We've seen after the death of Mike Brown how, municipalities in North St. Louis not on the same point, but how departments have historically used certain practices, or certain practices have disproportionately affected people of color in our Black and brown communities. So I would, I do thank you for your leadership on it, and I know you've been very proactive in meeting with groups North and South to make sure that this just doesn't work for your ward, it works for the whole city, but especially ones that have may not have the ability to pay off maybe these red lights and eventually get tickets and warrants, and then fall into this debt spiral and then be incarcerated for speeding. I'm not saying that's right, but we know how that spiral works. At least some of us know how that works when you're constantly getting fined and ticketed, and who that affects and who that don't affect. So appreciate your leadership, and I'm glad we're having a holistic conversation around this.
Thank you. I'm of the belief that we should adopt the amendments today, but I understand the sponsor doesn't want to do that with his bill, so I will not put any additional pressure on unless your mind's changing.
No.
Okay. So at this time, do you have anything you'd like to say do we have any written testimony? Let's just acknowledge that before we do any voting.
Sorry, we have none for Board Bill 105.
Except what we were handed?
I'm sorry?
Except what we were handed here today?
Yes, that's
okay.
it.
Let's make sure that this gets into the record. Okay, Alderman Cohen, anything to say in closing?
No, I believe what needed to be said has already been said. I would like to just reiterate my thanks to the President's office, the Mayor's office, the Counselor's office, Judge McCoy. I know you were very busy this weekend as well, working through some of these amendments. And so I do want to acknowledge that and the community that has been showing up to, share their perspective with respect to both Board Bill 105 and 106. I do believe that, there is a great need to ensure that our streets are safer than they are currently, and needing to have tools available to our constituents to help them understand. Whenever you approach an intersection, you should take great caution. It does not matter if you're a pedestrian, a cyclist, or in a vehicle. An intersection is and I'm sorry if I'm getting onto a kind of safe streets, tangent here, but an intersection is a deadly and dangerous place to be, irrespective of, how fast people are going, et cetera. And I think in our city in particular, where we have, more stop signs per capita than any other city in the country, and we have, I would argue that we don't have a traffic problem because we have streets that are widely too large and underutilized, which allows them to somewhat feel like interstates in the middle of our neighborhoods and allows people the mentality that they can travel as fast as they want to or can along those streets, which is a very unsafe and dangerous thing to do. And, I firmly believe that, we should be acting, from an equitable perspective when it comes to justice. And that's one of the many reasons why I have, worked so hard to ensure that those things are incorporated into this bill, and have done so in conjunction with both the Mayor's office and the President of the Board of Aldermen's office. And I do understand that the amendments, all 10 of them, kind of came at the very last minute here. So I would like to allow people the opportunity to digest the information that was shared today. And certainly I am committed to having conversations with both the President's office and the office on, thank you for your consideration otherwise.
Thank you. With that, I will entertain a motion for a due pass recommendation for Board Bill 105 committee substitute.
I recommend, or I move, that we pass Board Bill 105 committee substitute out with a due pass recommendation.
We have a motion and a second. Any call for previous roll?
Previous roll.
Any objection to previous roll? Hearing no objection, we have passed Board Bill 105 committee substitute from committee with the due pass recommendation. Alderman, you ready for 106?
I'm ready.
Okay, you're recognized on Board Bill number 106.
Thank you, members of the committee. Board Bill 106 is the implementation of the Neighborhood Traffic Improvement Fund. Board Bill 106 enumerates some of the items that fund can be utilized for. It's not limited to just those, but would essentially allow us to use any revenue that's generated through the automated camera enforcement to improve traffic outcomes and safety outcomes on our streets and our neighborhoods, on our non-arterial streets. It also allows for the ability that we could fund, at least partially, a driver's education course for people in our city.
Okay, thank you. I've spent a lot of time looking at this bill, and I know we had a hearing on this bill already as well. You have no amendments or substitutes or anything for it? Okay, Madam Clerk, do we have any people here to speak on this bill?
Mr. Boyd?
Just one person on the bill? Okay. And Alderman Keys, you're recognized.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So for Board Bill 106, my question is, we're talking about driver's education, but what measures will be taken in terms of public service announcements to make people more aware of the dangers of high-speed driving.
Alderwoman, so that's not specifically identified as a revenue or an expenditure underneath Board Bill 106. If members of you all have the ability to amend the bill if you feel as though there's something that needs to be added to that, I am certainly open to ideas. And even if this passes, if there are other pieces of feedback or ideas that come forward, I would certainly be in those in the future. I don't think that that's a bad idea. I mean, I certainly think that that could be part of the education component to traffic safety, but certainly that could be added if you wish through an amendment. But as of right now, I don't have a lot of background in terms of how much something like that would cost, or if we would be able to undertake something of that nature. But certainly would be open to the idea of including that.
Any further questions, Alderman?
No, thank you, but I definitely think that as an essential part of driver education, that should go hand in hand with public service announcements. Whether that be social media, commercials on television, billboards, all of that, I think is an essential part of this.
I agree.
Or should be anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Aldridge, any questions before we take comments?
No, I would just, I think the sponsor to Alderwoman McKee's point, I think education is great, and I appreciate the alderman for trying to figure out how to make that happen. Would love to work with Alderwoman McKee's and the alderman to figure that out. I know we're a little past the one previous before, but again, just want to thank the sponsor for a lot of collaboration on this piece of legislation. And I did forget to mention the oversight piece that he's been very also tuned in on as we're trying to ensure, bringing up community, that this works in a way that doesn't, hurt people more than help them. So just continue to appreciate your leadership.
Thank you, Alderman. I'm pretty familiar with the bill and would actually please, Madam Clerk, if add me as a co-sponsor. Thank you. And now we will move on to public comment on the bill.
Mr. Boyd, is it? Willie Boyd?
Is his being sworn in already sworn in?
Yeah, he did. He spoke on
Okay.
Board Bill 105.
Okay. Thank you for coming back for this bill, for staying with us today.
Yes.
Please continue, sir.
My concern.
Please state your name and where you are from.
Willie Boyd.
Thank you.
14th Ward.
Thank you.
Longtime resident, stay at 1435 East DeSoto. I've seen the population deteriorate from 8,000 in the 3rd Ward down to less than 3,000. I've seen the south side be built up and the north side be neglected. And I think if there is some revenue generated from these cameras and the way black folks have been discriminated against on the north side, that some of those funds need to go toward fixing up the north side. That's how I feel about this.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that comment.
Sorry, Mr. Boyd, were you in support or opposition?
I'm in support of education, but the funding.
Please use the mic, sir. We just want to make sure people at home can hear you.
I'm for education, but the funding revenue stream coming from these red light cameras, I think should be targeted toward fixing up the north side. Everybody, they've did studies to show how the north side has been discriminated against over the years, and I think that should be fixed.
Thank you.
Period.
Thank you, sir. Okay.
That concludes the speaker.
Thank you very much. Before we continue and I let Alderman Cone close on this, any additional comment?
I have one more question.
Sure, Alderman, please continue. Let's get your.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. So, Alderman Cone, let's circle back around to my question when we were on 105. So we were talking about our St. Louis Public Schools who currently do not have driver's ed programs. So again, the question remains, who will do the work? If it's not the St. Louis Public Schools, is this something that would possibly be farmed out to maybe private driving schools? I need more information on this.
Yeah, so Alderwoman, as I mentioned, that is to be determined based off of the review, and this fund would sit largely with the streets department, and so the streets director would be working with the administration and others to determine how best we can use these funds. There's somewhat intentional ambiguity or openness for the use of these funds with respect to traffic calming, traffic safety, education measures, because we don't know for certain how much revenue would be generated, by the automated camera enforcement program versus the cost for each of these, kind of enumerated items as well. So driver's education courses, if we were to implement them at every high school in the city, whether that's public, charter, et cetera, I don't have a firm number in terms of how much that would cost right now, but that would be something that would be worked on by the folks who are administering essentially the trust fund.
Okay, so then the next part of that question becomes, so we've got the cameras, there's a percentage, I would think, of that revenue going to this driver's ed program, right? What percentage are they predicting that would go to that program?
There's, as I mentioned, Alderwoman, there's not yet a determined amount, and therefore no percentage that would be required to go to driver's education right now. And as I mentioned in our earlier conversation, there was a grant that was applied for by the administration through the Department of, I believe it was the State's Department of Transportation for driver's education courses, and I think it was a $500,000 grant. Oh, $60,000, significantly less. Okay. But essentially that would be utilized to help provide courses. Now, again, does SLPS have the capacity to administer those courses themselves? That's a conversation that has to still take place. Or do we have, someone who essentially would be a third-party vendor that provides those courses? Because part of this as well is it's not just the hiring of staff and other things to administer those funds for a driver's education course. You also have to get a vehicle. You have to insure the vehicle. So are those things are we going to do that for every school? So these are all questions that would be fleshed out, throughout the evaluation process of the expenditure of those funds.
Well, given the amount of your grant, I don't see you being able to do much of any of that out of $60,000 or even, $500,000. This can be a very expensive endeavor. And so my question is, where does the funding come from if this is what we say we want to do? The infrastructure for it is not within our St. Louis Public Schools at this time. So they would have to make room for it, train staff, or if it's going to be staff from, at the state level, the people who conduct the drivers, I don't know. But this just, I have a lot of questions, and then to not pair it with enough public PSAs on top of the actual work and having the funding to do the work. I'm just really wondering, 106 is to do what?
So 106, as I mentioned, Alderwoman, usage of funds is enumerated in Section 3 of Board Bill 106. If you want to add, a PSA component to this, you are more than welcome to. I am open to that. That's an amendment. I can't offer that. I'm not on the committee. So, someone on the committee would have to make that amendment. And, I'm favorable towards that. I have no, issue with it whatsoever. So if you want to add that, Alderwoman, please do.
Yes, I believe that that is necessary, but additionally, the funding is a real concern. If you say you're going to be able to do this, you don't have any real numbers as to what it would take to do this. Where's the money going to come from? I'm not saying that it's something that we should not do, but I'm saying that if this is what we're saying we're going to do, we should already have some information on what percentage of the money that comes from the violations goes to this program. Um, what does it cost? And like I said, if we do go with St. Louis Public Schools as a vendor, we don't even know what it would take to build out that program.
Alderwoman, as I mentioned, we don't know what the revenue is going to be. I can base some slight projections off of the revenue that we were collecting when the program was in place previously, which in the prior committee hearing, I had estimated that that was between $1 and $2 million annually that we were receiving through automated camera enforcement. I don't know if that number would be higher or smaller today than it was 10 years ago. But if we were to even use that as a baseline estimate of 1 million to 2 million a year, that certainly would be adequate enough to be able to fund some of those programs. And I think the intention here is to allow some latitude on the part of the streets department to determine those priorities and where that funding should. But again, if you want to add an amendment that includes PSAs or includes a percentage of the revenue going to a specific purpose, I am open to that.
Okay, so my question is now, okay, let's say all of this is done, it's gone through. At what point, calendar year of us doing your driver's ed program kick in? Because you're just starting off, you wouldn't be able to really start it with the amount of money that you initially gave. So would it begin year one after the program is initiated, year two? How long before you can guesstimate that we would be able to get this thing up and running?
So I think that that kind of goes hand in hand with Alderman Browning's question earlier with respect to the timing of automated camera enforcement, which the mayor's office says it depends. So, there are a lot of different factors involved in the timing. So not the least of which is, we have to go through an RFP process. The RFP process takes time, it has minimum time, standards involved with that. If I had to guess and put an estimate out there, I would say in order to implement the automated camera enforcement, it would probably take a year at best to go through the RFP process, go through the vendor selection process, go through the defining guidelines, selecting locations for the installation of the cameras, and then once the cameras are installed, which could also take several months depending upon the vendors that we're using and the availability of contractors at the time, you're looking at probably a year for just the installation of those cameras. And then, of course, we have the 30-day period there, so that's another month that's in addition to that. And then the revenue would, from those would then, have to go through the courts. There's going to be a due process component to this. So the fees would probably be like another 30 to 60 days out from, that in terms of the collection of those fees that are generated. So I would say at best, it's probably a minimum of a year and a half out. If you want me to overlay that, with the school district schedule and, the curriculum, I'm probably not going to be able to do that in my head right now. But I would say it's probably 2 school years out before they would be able to work on that. But in the interim, they could still work on the implementation of the program. So we would have an idea in terms of the revenue that's coming in place, and we would be able to use the grant to fund a position to be able to work through the program particulars of a driver's education curriculum.
So the next question I have is, so to install these cameras, what is the cost? Are we leasing them? Are we in a lease program with the vendor, or who owns, who installs, who maintains these cameras?
So that would have been related to Board Bill 105, not the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Improvement Fund, because the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Improvement Fund has nothing to do with the actual administration of the cameras. So, but to answer your question, that would be determined through the RFP process when the vendor proposals go out for the automated camera enforcement. So that's not something that I can tell you right now, because that would be based off of the vendor requirements.
I appreciate that. But my concern again goes back to what percentage of that revenue will be used to support your driver's ed program?
Okay,
You know, is it,
oh, sorry.
what do you think would be a reasonable percentage that would be used to support this program?
Alderwoman, as I mentioned, I left that intentionally open so that it could be determined by, city government officials to be able to formulate that and create a plan. So I left that intentionally open. However, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to add an amendment to indicate that a certain percentage of the revenue goes to PSAs, driver's education, et cetera, I am open to that.
Okay, so then how do we entertain that?
Alderman, you would need to produce an amendment.
Okay, do I need to do that now? Do I need to do it after we finish up today? How does that work?
It would depend when you want it to be considered. So if you want it to be considered today, you would need to draft the language to put the amendment that you want, where you'd put it, and that that would be how you do that.
Okay, I will reach out to the clerk right now. Thank you.
Yeah, or if you want it considered on the floor, you can do it. Sorry.
Right. If you're not ready right now, thank you, Alderman Cone. Thank you. The second option, Alderman, is if you're not ready at this exact moment or want more time to think about it, you'd be able to make the amendment on the floor in 2 weeks if this passes out of committee.
Let me talk to the clerk quickly. Okay. I'll be back.
Thank you. Yeah, to that point, I appreciate that. I'm reading it as here are the permitted use funds, not designating a specific amount for each thing, which to me I like because some of these things have funding sources, some of them don't. For example, the driver's education, we just passed a grant, I believe they're sponsored by Alderman Boyd, that the city has grant money that is going to facilitate some of these programs. So we might say, okay, we're trying that out. So what we're going to do with these funds is a different one of these options, which is why I'm not sure I would be in support of adding in any sort of specific percentage now. I understand the Alderwoman's point in wanting to do that, but I would have questions whether that would be what I would support. Vice Chair Browning, it looks like you want to say something.
I did too, Alderwoman, Madam Chair. And that the points that she's bringing up are points that I certainly considered when introducing the bill, but based off of the conversations I had with both the administration, the streets director, BPS, et cetera, left it somewhat open so that we could certainly signage around speed limits costs much different than doing curb bump outs at every intersection in the city. One would be, several thousands of dollars and one would be several millions of dollars. A driver's education course, that's still kind of to be defined in terms of the cost. So I didn't put percentages in here specifically because, I thought we needed the latitude to be able to make those decisions based off of both the need and the amount of revenue that's coming in and the cost of those programs or infrastructure enhancements.
I appreciate that. We have a lot of different funding sources, but not this one would be direct for these specific things. Okay. Vice Chair Browning, did you have something?
Yeah, just to echo the conversation here, I think leaving it a little more open-ended is also wise just because if these cameras have the intended effect, which is to reduce the number of violations, you'd actually see a declining revenue from that, which we wouldn't want to see a specific percentage then become an amount that wouldn't necessarily be able to achieve that outcome. So, just if we got a lot of money the first year from it and that could go towards fully funding a program, great. But what if we got, less so we could afford to do a few speed humps with it? That'd be great because it would mean fewer violations. So that would be a positive thing, but it would not be good if it scuttled a program that was already in action. So I think I would also not be in favor of an amendment adding a percentage at this time.
Thank you. Alderman Aldridge has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Alderman, for working on this. And also, I appreciate Alderwoman Keys for, bringing up I think of if that amendment is not the right one, just flagging, flushing out. And that's, I guess, a question I have. Will this fund be used to, I guess, pay for the, so when I see like citywide speed limit signs, that would be one of the things that's in the bills is, when you install a new camera, you have to put the speed sign, right? I guess what I'm getting to, could this fund initially be used to pay for things that the vendor need to make sure that this program could run?
These are revenues that are after
it.
Administrative costs. So anything that is above and beyond the cost of administering the program would be deposited into this fund.
Makes sense. Okay. And then,
and if I may,
sorry, go ahead,
Alderman, the citywide speed limit signs, I added that because I want to review whether or not our current citywide speed limit is an acceptable speed limit or not. And so we would buy new signage.
Yeah. And then my other question is, so this would be, it's called the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Improvement Fund, which would be administered through the Streets Department, correct?
Correct.
Is there any language, I know it said it's only to be spent on these projects, but is there any language that you'd be willing to ensure that, I guess, those funds, and we can have this kind of offline to make sure I'm thinking of it right, that the funds can be used back for like general revenue? Because I know that was one of the things that we talked about, right, is how the red light camera ticket funds originally was going back into general revenue and use a general revenue operational cash cow for it. I'm just thinking I don't know if street signs, alleyway, cross striping, if that's like a certain fund in the streets department, or will that somehow still fall under general revenue? And then if the streets department don't use it, then it falls into the City of St. Louis general revenue.
So there's a couple different questions there, I think. So one, this would establish a fund. The revenue generated would be deposited into that account. And once that's done, it cannot be moved outside of that account, unless it's done legislatively. So it would have to be done either through the appropriations process during our budget time, or a separate, bill that would authorize the expenditure of the moving of those funds from the trust fund to another account for the purpose.
So during the budget process, technically, if E&A go and said we're going to take all this money from the neighborhood traffic fund and put in general revenue, that could be something that, and we know at this body, only thing we can do is decrease. So we couldn't increase that back into that fund. So if E&A decides to take all that money, earnings tax is gone, we have $2 million in it, we have a shortfall in our budget, and here's a fund that was created off all these tickets, technically they still could move that money around to the.
So, and that's why I brought that up. Yes, they can, but that's also why it's incumbent upon us as alderpersons to review our city budget every year and go through that process. And you're correct that we can't add things. We certainly can influence that though. And I'll use one example from, it was either my first or second term down here. Similarly, we have the Prop S funds for at-risk youth. And during the Slay administration, they zeroed that out in the budget. And I believe it was Alderman French at the time who represented the 21st Ward, who was on the Ways and Means Committee at the time and fought very hard. And I supported him at the time to be able to get the Prop S funds restored in our budget. And so Yes, it can happen through that process, but I think we also need to be diligent in making sure that we're, fighting for those resources as well. And so any bill, any ordinance can be amended by a subsequent ordinance. We just need to be mindful of the impact that those have on these types of programs.
And I mean, I appreciate your leadership on this of ensuring that there was this different fund set up and trying to think outside the box to ensure that it wasn't used in the way that it has been in the past.
But I wasn't quite finished, Alderman.
Oh, you let me keep going. I wasn't sure if who was finished here now.
Well, but I think the second part to your question, it can't just be moved to general revenue on its own. It has to be done legislatively. But there is a requirement in Board Bill 106, I think it's Section 4, that requires annually the Streets Department to report on the revenue and expenses that are being expended from this fund as well. So, if they send over a report saying, well, we, had revenue of $2 million, come in from automated camera enforcement, and what did it get expended on? Nothing, because it was appropriated general revenue, we would know. So it's just another kind of stopgap that's in the bill to help ensure that we're keeping track of the funds and ensuring that they're being spent in a manner that's consistent with this bill.
I hear you. No, and like I say, I appreciate you doing it a different way. I don't see how it couldn't be done. You keep saying legislatively. I don't see how it could not be done if it then will be a fund in the budget, how ENA couldn't do it without legislation from this board. Just flagging that of who knows what administration or what funding gap the city may be in where we need to cover the bottom line, and this generates a lot of money. But I know that's not your intent. You're just trying to do something different, which I do appreciate.
Okay, any other questions from members of the committee? Alderman Keys, would you like to speak? You're recognized.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks again, Madam Chair. At this time, I would like to work with Alderman Cone as well as Alderman Aldridge on kind of building out this information for, if we're going to say that we're working with certain entities, we need to have, I think at least an initial conversation about who's going to do the work. And then where the funding comes from, and some of that will be, answered as I guess as the bill moves forward. But I have some concerns, and I'd like to work with you guys on making sure that information is true and correct and forthcoming for people who have questions like I do. And Alderman McCone, thank you so much for your work on 105 as well as 106.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Just to be clear, are you wanting to work on an amendment for...
An amendment, yes, please.
For the floor or for today?
No, we can do it at a later time.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. Thank you, Alderman. Thank you for the questions. Anyone else have any questions? We have no further speakers, no written comments.
We have none.
Okay, Alderman Cone, you're recognized to close.
Thank you all. This is certainly one of the more exciting parts for me in terms of the automated camera enforcement, being able to actually use funds that are generated to provide that education, that awareness, and the infrastructure improvements that are really needed on our neighborhood streets to curtail speeding instead of just slapping up another stop sign or another speed hump, which those both can be effective tools when used properly. But I certainly look forward to the ongoing discussion and working with my colleague from the 11th Ward on any potential amendments as well. But would ask for your favorable consideration at this morning's committee, or now this afternoon's committee hearing.
Thank you very much. At this time, I will entertain a motion for a due pass recommendation of Board Bill 106.
So move.
Second.
Previous row.
Any objection to previous roll? Hearing no objection, we have passed Board Bill 217, or I'm sorry, my goodness, I'm looking ahead. Board Bill 106 out of committee with the due pass recommendation. Thank you so much, Alderman Cone, for your time this morning and all of your work. Moving along in the agenda, we are going to move to Board Bill, I believe it is 221. We're going to change things around just as I know we have some speakers waiting on that one. Board Bill 221, Alderman Kara Spencer, you are recognized. Not breaking as long as we can, please.
Whoa, this thing is taped down.
It's serious.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Okay. Board Bill 221 is a board bill specifically designed to help us as a city to better address reckless driving in our city. Let me start by saying that, putting this bill together, I want to recognize Joe Taylor, who's in the audience here, who's a volunteer lawyer in our community, who recognized this issue and kind of helped come up with a thinking outside the box, how we could expand what we're doing. I don't think anybody in our city, in our region, could argue that we are doing enough to address reckless driving. Reckless driving has become an enormous, heartbreaking, heart-wrenching issue, one of safety, one of perception, but certainly one of just, the public safety issue is extremely significant here. So to start out with, I'll say that reckless driving is not only impacting people. We have lost 6 pedestrians to reckless driving since just January 1. We've had 10 fatal car-involved accidents and lost 11 people in less than 3 months. This is absolutely out of control. I would argue that this is this is a crisis that our city is in. We have a pedestrian fatality rate 3 times the national average, and that was the last time we did calculations, and I don't think our numbers have gotten any better. So in putting this together, coming up with a concept, I asked myself, first, should we do something more about reckless driving? And the answer was overwhelmingly yes. Who should be involved in that solution? Who should be addressing and approaching reckless drivers? The only entity I could come up with is our police department, intervening when you have lives at risk. Right now, when you're pulled over, when a person is driving recklessly and endangering the lives of our community and those around them, a police officer can pull someone over, and they have a couple of different options. They can write you a ticket. They can also, if you're driving recklessly enough, arrest you and impound your vehicle. But there's really nothing in between. And so the idea here behind 221 was to really create an additional tool in the toolbox to give our officers an additional tool to deter reckless driving. And what Board Bill number 221 does is authorizes a police officer to put a boot on your car, to basically arrest the vehicle from continuing. Right now, when you're given a ticket, you are able to leave that scene and continue on driving. Whether or not you abide the law the rest of the evening or you show up to court and be held accountable is to be determined. Board Bill number 221 provides for an immediate deterrence, an immediate impediment to you continuing to drive recklessly and putting the lives of others at risk. Our goal here is not to incarcerate people, to seize their property indefinitely, or to harm people in any way. It's to prevent them from driving recklessly. I approach this from a personal perspective. My goal here isn't to demonize those folks that are driving recklessly or to put unnecessary harm on them. I lost my sister reckless driving. It's been some time, but she lost her own life driving recklessly. This isn't to say those that are involved in that activity are evil people necessarily or need to be punished unduly, but we do need to curb this behavior. And I believe putting in an immediate action of booting a car, creating an enormous, a significant hurdle, and requiring somebody to go back and get that boot taken off is a deterrent that can help curb that behavior. I'd like to, as part of my presentation here, invite Captain Joe Marisi up to talk a little bit about what the police department is doing. While I have said that we're not doing enough, I want to first commend Captain Marisi for taking over traffic enforcement. I know that we have actually, as a city, been doing a lot more than people realize to enforce our current laws with a police force that is slowly getting smaller and smaller. But Captain Marisi, I came to know as the 3rd District Captain. He did an excellent job representing the 3rd District. Has some stark statistics to show and share with us today about not only traffic fatalities, but some of the good work that is happening within our traffic enforcement division.
Thank you. And good afternoon.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, no problem. My
Please.
pleasure.
If you could please just introduce yourself again and state your name for the record.
Major Joe Marisi. I've been with the St. Louis City Police Department for 30 years. I'm currently the commander over the Specialized Enforcement Division of the Police Department, which includes traffic safety. Some of the things that traffic safety, it's broke down into 3 groups. I have the traffic officers that do traffic every day. I have the accident reconstruction officers, and I also have commercial vehicle enforcement. So that makes up the traffic division that all work under me. Traffic officers work in conjunction with St. Louis County Police. Once a month, at least once a month, we'll be out on the highways. It's called our High Impact Day. We find a stretch of highway that leads from both the city and the county, and we'll get all the officers and we'll enforce traffic on the highways. We do that at least once or twice a month in correlation with St. Louis County. We also do what we call our High Visibility Impact. You might see that as the alderman in the wards. We do one day where we pick one district, and we'll pick maybe 4 locations there. And those locations come from crime data along with community meetings that we go to. The people ask us if we could have a little bit more enforcement in certain areas. So we do that. And I also work hand in hand with the captains. There's been a lot, as you probably know, promotions and things with captains in the districts, new captains. And I've met with all of them and let them know that if they go to a community meeting or they need me to speak at a community meeting, I'd be more than happy to do so. And they also will give me information where I can get cars to a location that maybe they have a stop sign, maybe they have a school that in the area where they're running a stop sign. We just had one of those the other day. I'll get traffic officers there and address it right away. So we are doing a lot with traffic. I do have some specific numbers if you guys would like to hear them as far as fatalities, tickets written, and things like that, if you'd like to hear it.
Yes, please. Thank you.
In 2023, there were 53 fatalities in the city of St. Louis, and 18 of those were pedestrians. Then in 2024, so far this year, we have 11 fatalities, with 6 being pedestrians. And in 2022, when it comes to enforcement and when it comes to tickets written, we've written 31,833 tickets in the year of 2022. And with 20% of those being for improper plates and things of that nature, the rest being with hazardous driving. And then 2023, we wrote 32,662 tickets. And again, about 22% of that. I know that that's a big deal also in the city as far as people driving without proper plates, about 20%.
20% was with, not with proper plates. Okay.
What was that number?
32,000.
32,662.
Thank you.
And then just looking at traffic accidents in the city of St. Louis for 2022, there was 14,918 accidents. And then in 2023, we've had 14,358.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'll move through the committee for questions for the captain. Alderman Vollmer, any questions?
No real questions. I appreciate all the hard work he does. I'm familiar with the traffic division, and I know they just need more people to help us all out. Sure. But thank you very much.
Alderman Keys?
No, thank you. I don't have any questions at this time.
Okay. Vice Chair Browning?
Thank you. I really understand the intention of this bill and agree that we need to take action. And I appreciate you sharing both personal stories, which must have been difficult, but also just acknowledging the crisis that our city is facing. And Officer Marisi, I want to thank you for your work and making sure that we're enforcing the laws. I know that, of the methods we're talking about, we talked a lot about education just a second ago. But enforcement is a key part of keeping our streets safe and making sure that we have people who are abiding by the law so as to not endanger others. I have a few questions for the sponsor.
Do you want to keep them to the Captain Marisi now, or?
I think I'm done with the captain.
Okay. Are you able to stay for a little bit longer?
Sure.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Captain.
So I just want to acknowledge that our captain was promoted to major. He's a major.
Oh, major. Apologies.
You see?
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for recognizing his service
I
as.
certainly want to use the correct rank, so
I think it was confusing.
major, our apologies. Alderwoman Spencer, I was curious if you know currently if the Treasurer's Office has boots in stock or if this is a practice we currently do in the city.
As part of this, I do have a few amendments that I was proposing to kind of put out. I'm not going to be proposing that the Traffic Division be the entity that provides the boots. The reason being that traffic is not, the Parking Enforcement Division is not under the city per se directly, and they're not on call 24/7. So we're really looking for an entity that had that 24 traffic response capability. And so thinking through that, I'm proposing that we hand that over to our City Tow Division because they do have a 24 response unit. They also have the capacity in their department to determine whether or not a vehicle belongs to that person that is coming to get the boot off. So they do that already when vehicles. And so they do not have those boots. I have asked Ryan Coleman, our financial advisor for the board, to take a look at what it would cost to purchase new boot equipment. They're about $825 a piece. Buying them in bulk could get us down to about $750. So we would be proposing a budget of about $35,000 to purchase boots for our city tow department to be able to deploy these.
Okay, you anticipated my next question, so I appreciate that. I think I highlighted this in a conversation previous, but I want to note on section 1, point D, points 1 and 2 and 3, it references the vehicle having a lawful owner and making sure that the lawful owner is the one that's able to obtain the vehicle. What if the vehicle has multiple lawful owners, like it's a shared car between a couple, and one of them was recklessly driving?
Mm-hmm. Let me, maybe it would be helpful. I know I have the amendment. I had 2 stacks here. Why don't I make sure you guys each have the amendments, and I'll walk you through how the bill would actually work.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Let's do that.
And at this time, I'd like Vice Chair Browning to resume as the chair. I have a appointment at 1, and I will return in as I possibly can. Thank you, Vice Chair Browning.
Okay, thanks.
Okay,
Right,
taking
here's
over.
what basically what it, the bill essentially directs, you know, if with. If you don't mind. So we're not going to put these amendments before you. I just want you to see them because I'm going to speak to them in just a little bit. So essentially what the bill, as you can see here, Section 1, it really just defines reckless driving. We have no reckless driving state law. We have some other state laws that pertain to driving, but not one that is a reckless driving definition at the state level. That's fairly unusual. We do have an ordinance. What we did here was we expanded that a little bit in this bill, but after getting an opinion from the city councilor's office, have kind of reverted that back to the original reckless driving definition. That's one of the amendments. So if a person is committing the ordinance violation of reckless driving, then the police, a member of the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department is directed that they may apply a boot to the vehicle. And if the driver is the lawful, and then you kind of looking through Section D here, if the driver is the lawful owner of the vehicle, they may get the vehicle, they are required to post a bond payment. We're proposing to change that a little bit through the amendment process, which I can talk through. But if you are the owner and you are the person committing the reckless driving offense, what we want you to do is show up for court. Right now, that is not happening. People are not showing up, and so this is just to require that that person post bond to ensure that they actually show up to court and are held accountable. If the driver is not the lawful owner of the vehicle, the lawful owner of the vehicle can show up and get the boot removed with no cost associated with that. Okay, but the application of the boot will still be sort of a pain in the butt for the person driving the vehicle and the person for whom that was lending the vehicle to that reckless driver. And so your question, whether or not, if you are a reckless driver and you're one of the vehicle owners in a co-owning situation, yes, you'll have to pay that bond. That would be my understanding. If you are the reckless driver, if you are a co-owner and none of the co-owners were reckless driving, then that same would apply. You could just get the boot off without posting bond, paying a fine, or doing anything other than requesting that the boot be removed, showing proof of ownership of the vehicle.
Okay. And like I said, I definitely understand the need and agree with the intent of the bill. I'd definitely like to continue working on that because one thing I want to make sure we avoid is something in gun law that we know is the boyfriend loophole, which is the idea that somebody with a felony on their record just then sends their spouse or their partner in to buy the gun for them. Similarly with this, if someone's driving a car that's not theirs and they're driving it recklessly, they could just have the lawful owner come and get the car back at no cost, allowing them to continue that dangerous behavior. So I think there's some room to work on that to make sure that's not the case. But generally understand the point we're trying to make here.
I will say though, just to that point, this actually applies very well, in my opinion, to that case. If you are borrowing a vehicle and you're driving it recklessly, let's take a step back. If you're borrowing a vehicle and you go through a red light, we just spent 2 hours going through the red light bill. If you borrowed a vehicle and you're blowing through stoplights and we're getting you on these new cameras we're buying, there are almost no repercussions. Your face is not going to match the owner of the vehicle, and whether we get a photo of you or not, there's going to be no repercussion for that person driving recklessly borrowed vehicle. No repercussion. They're not going to get a red light ticket. We already know our police department is very anemic, so we're struggling here. So what this does is if we do pull you over, instead of just writing you a ticket and letting you go on your way and continue to drive that borrowed vehicle in a reckless manner, this stops the vehicle for the rest of that day. Stops you, becomes a pain in your rear end, and becomes an impediment and you're driving recklessly. It basically forces you to stop driving and to the owner of the vehicle for whom from whom you've borrowed the car, and explain what was going on, and now they have to go and remove the boot. And this will hopefully, through some, the idea would be that through some pressure, from your friend network, family network, or whatever network that is, that there's some additional respect owed to those from whom you're borrowing vehicles.
Understood. And yeah, I again just think I'd love to work on this further with you, because I really do think we need to address the reckless driving in our city. But I think there's so many circumstances we need to kind of consider. For years, I shared a car with my wife, and the car was in her name. Now, I don't drive recklessly, or at least I try not to. But I don't think that I don't want to see a situation where someone gets out of their behavior because they have not unclear ownership of the car or anything like that. I was also wondering if in the bill, the police, after pulling the driver over, notify the city towing division to come boot the car. The city towing division, in my experience, is not immediate, right? Their response is usually not to come out immediately. So what does the officer do in the meantime while they're waiting for the towing division to come out and boot that car? Do they take the keys? Do they hold the driver in custody? How does that work?
That's it. So right now, like I said, an officer has a couple of available tools, right? If they're driving extremely recklessly, that person can be arrested and the vehicle could be impounded, in which case, a city tow would have to be deployed to do that towing. So this would be similar. This is a solution in the middle of what we currently have. Right now, you can give a ticket, you can impound and incarcerate. Okay, those are the two options, or nothing, right? So our goal here is to come with a solution between the two of those that does not look like impounding and incarcerate, is a broader, more applicable solution, but does require that city tow do that. That is going to require the officer to wait until city tow can arrive to put in a boot, which is unfortunately a waiting moment, much like they would have to do if they were impounding the vehicle. But the hope here is that this would be less invasive, less intrusive than impounding the vehicle for the similar type of offense, and that it would be less time and less involvement on city tow to address that, to do that.
All right, thank you. Yeah, like I said, again, understand the intention here. Would like to continue to work on this with you. I definitely think I'd like to see something that holds the driver accountable rather than the car. I'm a little concerned our tow lots are already full in the city. It's something I think all deal with in our wards. And I'm not super enthused about having vehicles on the street for longer than the 5 days described in this bill, or even during those 5 days. There's several things that I'd just like to kind of go through with you line by line on this. But again, I do thank you for bringing the bill forward. I think it's important to address the reckless driving in our city, and would love to continue to explore this with you further. Alderman Aldridge, do you have any questions?
If you don't mind, I think that it's really important. I think the points you brought are good ones. I'd like to talk about them a little bit. I do agree with you that littering, that our tow lot being full is a major problem. In a city with as much vacant land as we have, it is nothing short of ridiculous that we cannot figure out how to expand the tow lot and have more capacity to store vehicles. And I think that is a major problem that clearly needs to have a remedy. Number two, I agree with you that I don't want to see these vehicles just piled up on the side of roads. But I would rather have a vehicle with a boot on the side of the road than continue to be driven in a reckless manner throughout our community. So if those are the two options, letting a recklessly driven vehicle continue to be driven recklessly, or to have a boot on the side of the road, I'll take the latter. That is my preference, given the state of affairs and the crisis moment that we're in when it comes to reckless driving.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Aldridge? I think so. They did not have any questions that I remember.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Alderwoman Spencer for bringing this forward. I think Alderman Browning kind of echo a lot of my sentiments, and I know we've talked offline on this, and I'm also willing to work with you on it. I think the goal in this, and I know as me and you had like passionate conversations about our intersection. I know what your goal is. I do think there is some things that aren't clear. It looks like, you know, from what we talked about, the reckless driving seemed to be a little bit more fleshed out. My concern is what is defined as reckless driving. Is it speeding? Is it running a red light? Is it doing donuts in the street? Like, and will this give, not saying and thank the department for being here and the police department for all they do, but will this just be another tool in the toolkit to be on top of a list that they can say, well, you know, maybe a bad encounter happened and say, well, you was reckless driving and now I'm gonna boot your car, right? So to just put some safeguards in there to ensure that if reckless driving actually happens, it is not being abused. Also got concerns about, I know you just addressed the tow lot. I think putting the boot in a different department, our treasurer office already do it. I get what you're saying, 24 hours, but you know, as we've talked, so I'm just curious of the process. So if I'm recklessly driving and the police pull me over, they call the tow department comes an hour, 50 minutes later. So we're also stationaring that officer from probably getting other reckless drivers if they're just sitting in that one location for a while. But once I get booted and I make bond, and what you're saying is if I'm the owner of the car, I would have to wait a day before I go to the courts to make bond, or I would have to have a court date to make the bond. How could I then go pay that same day? I was reckless driving at 9 o'clock and I got booted at 10. Would I go to the courts to pay my first offense, which would be, I know this amendment changed, $200?
Right, that you should be able to just post bond,
Okay.
your bond payment.
So that would be with the courts.
Correct.
And the courts would then call the tow department and ask them to release the boot?
That is a logistical piece that we need to fully flesh out, but that would be my understanding.
Because I know right now, since it is in the treasurer's office, if you get a boot, you literally go down to the same entity off of 7th and 8th Street. You get your boot removed. They then call. It's all in one, you know, system instead of multiple different entities. Instead of not trying to make our government even more archaic, but you know, from the courts to the it wouldn't be the treasurer's office. This would be the who would it be? The parking.
Parking is under the treasurer's
Yeah,
office.
but who would be in charge of the boot? I forgot the entity that you.
Tow?
The tow.
City tow. If you, Alderman, if you would be interested in exploring the city parking division handling this, I would be open to that. My concern would be they're a fee-driven entity, and I'm not sure exactly how taking on additional responsibility would be viewed by the treasurer's office.
Have the tow department been contacted to take on responsible to do, I guess, this responsible or more responsibilities?
We have not fleshed this out with the tow division. My intention was not to get this passed today, but to kind of flesh out some of these details. One of the things that's sort of nice about City Tow, they're under the city, you know, so we fund that department and how that works directly, as opposed to being a fee-driven office like the treasurer's office. I would be open to either. I don't have very preference on who applies the boot, to be honest with you, so long as there's an entity that could deploy them and have a process to relinquish them.
Okay. And what is the time frame? And I don't see the clean verse, so I'm just going off the amendments and trying to follow line. Follow everything. So it looks like you changed within 5 days, because originally if you didn't pay it in 5 days, it was impounded.
That's right.
So what is the timeline now? It just says appeal process is set out in chapter 17.56, and I didn't.
Yeah, we added that process of appeal. So, Alderman, I have to get the specifics of how that is outlined in that chapter.
Okay.
So, let's see.
Because I was just curious if it was still a 5-day, or did that chapter make it go to 2-day or 3-day? Because originally, if you didn't pay the 500, in which you changed that amount from first offense 200, second offense 275, third offense 350, which
That accords with state law as it pertains to minor traffic violations. So that was one of the issues the city councilor pointed out, was her concern that that we wanted to make sure that it did conform to state law in that regard. So we more clearly stated that.
So is there still, I guess, that 5-day period? If I have the boot on my car for 5 days, will it be impounded, or is the state law said it sits there for 5 days? And
State law doesn't specify on that, to my knowledge, but I'd have to get how that kind of would work out.
okay, because I'm curious about that impound part, and the reason I was asking about that is also get into the tow lot. And I hear you saying we have a lot of open land. We do, but until we figure out what to do with it, my fear, and I know in budget we talked about this as a chairperson, my fear is if we start impounding all these cars and the lot is already full, what does that look like? Then I think about, I know reckless driving is a problem, but if it then sits in the tow lot, there's more and more fees added up before you actually can get your car out of the tow lot. So kind of what I brought up with the red light cameras, I always think about just all options in this debt spiral that may become an issue. So I think between operations, we'd love to figure that out with you. And
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable set of concerns. I think, one of the concerns I was hearing from advocates in favor of addressing reckless driving was just that, that potential for a debt spiral and disproportionately impacting people of lower income, people who are sharing vehicles and that sort of thing. Certainly that's not our intention here, but I want to be clear, this is really specifically for people that are endangering the lives of our community. We are seeing people being killed by vehicles. Vehicles driven recklessly are weapons, and these are instances where vehicles are being used as such in a reckless way that could really kill people. To your point about I want to go back to the definition of reckless driving. This is something that some of the advocates in this space pointed out and agreed with you that this needed to be, in their view, flushed out. We took a look at every single definition of reckless driving in state law, and there really are not states that define what constitutes specifically. And I think there's good reason for that being, you can, if you clearly define it, there's always outside, it always becomes a gray area. So we wanted to conform to what states are doing as best practices, and it does give some jurisdiction to our police department. And I asked myself, to your point, with some of the concerns about, giving our police more, jurisdiction. I mean, to me, our police department needs that jurisdiction and needs some of that gray area to be able to appropriately determine when someone's life's at risk. And there's no other entity that could do that. And at some point, I'm just hoping that we can rebuild that trust within the fabric of our community as a necessary part of having effective law enforcement and a safe community. So, it is that's a tough question. But I think, leaving the definition as it is really is in line with best practices throughout throughout state laws. But I do take your point, is there another way to do it? I think if we were to really, really clearly define it and take that discretion out, we make it so confined that it opens up a can of worms for, lawsuits and making that a little too specific can make it a very big gray area.
Yeah, and I think it's a two-way street, and I do get what you're saying. I think It could be a lawsuit if somebody feel like their rights was violated and they wasn't reckless driving. Maybe they turned right on red. Not saying the department does it, but if this is just vague, it can be part of a list that says, "Oh, well, they was reckless driving." So I think it's a two-way street, and we are rebuilding. And as we are rebuilding, we have to, with trust between people, we have to take all sides into considerations. I'm not saying that the department would overuse it, but what I'm saying is, with it being so vague, that could be a add-on. As say you get pulled over, you get a seatbelt ticket, you for speeding, and the police officer can say, "Well, you're reckless driving," and now that offense isn't just a ticket; it is your car being impounded, depending on if you're the owner, if you're not the owner. And I think that's if we're going to take that threshold and that leap of something that I think is very serious, because we have a serious problem in our community, we have to really think about all the serious outcomes that can happen, and how do we dot our I's and cross our T's with doing it.
Just on that same point, though, we are able right now to book and impound a vehicle on some of these cases. So this is a tool that gives us kind of that middle ground. Our police department, if you're endangering the lives of the community, an officer can write you a ticket, book you, and take your car and send it to city tow. That is on the table right now. This is really just putting an intermediary step. What if we don't want to book you and arrest you and take your car to city tow, but we do want to do more than write you a ticket. We want to stop that vehicle. We want to say, game over for right now. Game over. You're not doing this anymore today. And that's where this bill comes in. And it gives us a less invasive approach than impounding a vehicle, but is more of an impediment than just simply writing a ticket and letting you go and possibly showing up for court. We have a major issue with people showing up and being held accountable. There's not very serious repercussion for failing to show up for court right now, and that's a big problem.
I'm not going to lie, Alderwoman, that statement a little bit confused me, because you said the department already can book you, they could arrest you, and they can take the car. And what you're proposing is, instead of them arresting you, they just hold the car instead of impounding the car.
Right now, and I think Major Maurice would be able to speak to this better than I could, but if you are operating a vehicle in a wild, reckless way, an officer does have the authority to not only write you a ticket, but to book you, to arrest you, and impound your vehicle. Yes, and that does happen.
And what you're proposing, if
that is an extreme case, I'm saying we already give our police department that authority and discretion. That exists, and it happens. What this bill does is also say, okay, so when you're really driving wildly recklessly, maybe that's appropriate. And then there is, an officer could also just write you a ticket and let you go. That is not a very big impediment. So this bill is somewhere in between. For people that are driving recklessly, we want to do more than write you a ticket, but we don't necessarily want to incarcerate you and impound your vehicle. But we do want to provide a serious deterrent and be easier on the police department than booking you and taking you down and taking your vehicle. And this is an intermediary. This is an approach I'm hoping can be more widely deployed than booking you, arresting you, and impounding your vehicle.
Gotcha. And just for clarity, a reckless driver, I'm recklessly driving, and this isn't into law. The police currently can, instead of book, they can write me a summons and impound the car.
Right now, an officer can write you a ticket.
And this would be writing a ticket.
Correct.
And booting the car.
Correct.
Okay.
Right now, if you're driving reckless, an officer could write you a ticket, book you, and impound your vehicle.
Or they could write you a ticket and not book you, but just impound the vehicle.
I think to impound the vehicle, they have to book you. Is that right?
Normally, it would be a ticket and vehicle.
Normally, it's just a ticket. That's correct. But I'm saying that there is a discretion. Is that right, Marie?
Sorry, Major, if you're answering questions, we need you at the mic so everyone.
It would be, there is a careless and reckless driving, you can be booked in your vehicle towed. You can also just get a ticket. So,
But well, my question is, if I'm recklessly driving currently now, you're saying only way you take the car is if you book them. You can't write them a ticket and say, I'm writing you a ticket because you was reckless driving, and due to your reckless driving, we're going to take your car, but I'm not going to book you. I'm going to give you some leniency. I'm not going to arrest you today. You're going to have to go get your car from the impound because that car is a weapon, and now you have to go get mom and dad to pick you up or a friend to pick you up.
when we book an individual, it would be on this ticket. We have them sign a tow option. So if they want to leave it there, they could probably leave it there. But if they want it towed, we would tow it. If they want it for their safekeeping, if they want their car towed, or they could leave it there, have somebody pick it up. I don't see if we would write someone a ticket in with letting them go and then tow their car. I don't think we would do that unless they requested it through a tow option form. So we wouldn't, if we're going to write them a ticket and let them go, we wouldn't tow their car just to tow their car. We'd probably get someone, like you said, a parent or somebody to come get it and let them know what they're up to if it was a younger person or something like that. So the officer would probably make arrangements to get the car taken care of.
Okay. I think that's all my questions.
I think just for clarity, the point was to just discuss discretion to our police department. And my point was that discretion to a large extent already on these issues, just for clarity. This isn't, a new sort of option to have discretion to our police department.
Does the committee have any more questions?
Nope.
Okay, Alderwoman, you are recognized to close.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to take a moment to really thank Major Marisi for spending several hours in the hallway waiting for this hearing today, and the work that our traffic division is currently doing. I want to also recognize, we had other members of the public here earlier. They left before being able to come and speak, in particular Tiffany Stanfield, who runs an organization called Fighting Hard, which is fighting hit and run driving. She lost her sister in 2016 to a hit and run driving accident, and is an advocate, a strong advocate on behalf of making our roads safer. She does a lot of great work, and I just wanted to acknowledge her presence here. Many of us, well, you two weren't here then, but we recognized her in 2020 down at the board when she came, and we put in a resolution requiring annual reports on traffic issues in the city. In closing, I want to say,
You're not considering your amendments today, are you? Or you don't want to?
I wanted to put the amendments before you so you could see what we had drafted. Since we're not going to be moving this bill forward, I'm not going to take a vote on the amendment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for clarification. But I wanted to, again, the point of this hearing really was to get this bill before the board, before this committee, to have some discussion, and to, I'm grateful to have the commitment from the two of you on working on a solution that looks like another tool for our city to make our streets safer and to start to curb the reckless driving, the commonplace that's become commonplace in our communities. And so that with that, I don't have an ask of the committee beyond maybe a working group and some ongoing discussion on some of the concerns and some of the positive work that could come out of a bill like this.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we are going to move on to our next agenda item.
I'm sorry, we do have a speaker.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize.
On Board Bill 221.
Okay, rewinding back. Let's take public comment on Board Bill 221. Madam Clerk.
It's Tammy Bufford? Okay. And you've already been sworn in.
So again, my name is Tammy Bufford. I'm a resident of the 3rd Ward with Action St. Louis and the Defund, Re-Envision, Transform campaign. I strongly oppose this bill. This bill states that the burden of proof for this offense shall not require evidence or specific intent. So it leaves it to the police officer to have their own bias and prejudice in order to pursue this. It leads to unconstitutionally violating the 4th Amendment rights, and assessing excessive fines. This leads to a debtor system that leads to all sorts of citizens in the city, unfortunately, having their vehicles booted, seized, with no sort of due process, essentially stealing their vehicles and property without any evidence of a crime. I mean, this bill actually makes no sense to me. The police already have their own discretion if a person is driving recklessly and they don't want them to continue driving on the streets. They can stop that from happening by arresting them or just simply having them not drive any further. So I don't feel that we need this bill at all. So I strongly urge the Board of Aldermen to reject this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. And with that, since we didn't do this in the right order, I'll just recognize the sponsor again if she wants to make any closing comments. Alderwoman?
I just, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out that in the amendments, we got the specific that concern that was addressed in the amendments that I put forward. I'm sorry I wasn't able to share those with the full crowd here, the audience. But I do hear that concern. We also took the fines down to the state level, so they mirror exactly what state law has. The original bill, just sort of a draft with that $500, but this now mirrors exactly what is in state law in accordance to minor traffic violations. So I hope that with those amendments, we've addressed the concerns, at least that you brought up here today.
All right, thank you, Alderwoman Spencer.
And if you have further ones, I mean, I view this as a working bill, and one, like I was saying earlier, that should allow us to create, sort of a hybrid between the incarcerate and impound, and just simply a ticket, because we also know that these fatalities, I mean, 11 of which have happened just in January 1st, are happening in areas of that are disproportionately impacting low-income communities. We are seeing people die in our streets far too frequently, and I think it's time that we tell the community that we're serious about this. Listening to Janae Edmondson and her family, if you haven't seen this, Christine Byers did a 30-minute interview with Janae and her family, and how a reckless driver has completely impacted. She's still alive. And the dismay with which she is looking, her family is looking at our city and what it is we're doing. And after her accident, seeing those two women watching that horrific vehicle where they lost their lives, immediately, we have to do something. We really have to do something down here. This is not perfect, I understand that, but it is a step in the right direction, I believe. And I hope with everyone's help, we can make it better, we can make it stronger, we can make sure that it's fair, and that we can start to effectively pull down that disproportionate amount of fatalities that our city experienced when you compare it to the national average. This is our roads are far too dangerous, and we are not doing enough. And I'm grateful for everybody who will be participating in making this bill better and communicating to the public we've had enough, and we are going to do better in the future. That's all I have for today. Thank you so much for sticking around.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you waiting for us to get around to your bill. It's been a long meeting, but again, appreciate the intent with which this bill was brought and the spirit that we do need to make our streets safer. I think we're all working towards that goal. At this time, we are going to move on to a measure to attempt to make a few streets a little bit safer with Board Bill number 238 by Alderman Rasheen Aldridge. Alderman, you are recognized.
Thank you, Alderman Browning and members of the committee. Today, I present to you Board Bill 238, and I move for its consideration. That's in front of you? I don't think I need to do that. It's already in front of us, so I can just proceed, right? Okay. It's a long day, and I'm eating my pistachios that Vollmer knows much about. Board Bill 238 is a speed hump bill. The way I do my speed hump bills is I lay them out in what neighborhood that they are. This is only the second one that I've done this session. I tried to get as much input from different neighborhood association meetings and out talking to the community to see what makes sense. I know that the chairwoman has a great process with the signatures, but this is, like I say, the second one is just several neighborhoods that have requested them that are also very high-flying areas. As we talk about our streets being more safe, I think this is just one measure at least we can do at the Board of Aldermen to try to do so. So there are several neighborhoods, including the Hyde Park neighborhood, that's included St. Louis Place, near North Riverfront and Downtown West, to hopefully bring these speed humps to the area to kind of slow down traffic in some fast driving areas in the 14th Ward. And with that, I will close for any questions.
Thank you. Starting, I'm not sure if Alderwoman Keys is still with us, but we'll start with Alderman Vollmer. Do you have any questions? Oh, she is. Hi, Alderwoman Keys. Do you have any questions?
Vollmer can go ahead and then I'll go after that.
Okay, we'll start with Alderman Vollmer.
He certainly has seniority.
No questions. I hope we're working on a way to stop having to do an ordinance for all these speed humps. This should be something that should be done with all this pomp and circumstance. But please proceed. No more questions.
Thank you, and agreed. Alderwoman Keys.
Thank you, Alderperson Browning. No, I don't have any questions. And as always, I do agree with Vollmer that this should be something we should just be able to get it done. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Absolutely, working on that. And Alderman Aldridge, I assume you don't have any questions about your own speed humps. I don't have any questions either. I appreciate you listening to your community and acting in their interests. With that, you are recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I make a motion for due pass recommendation on Board Bill 238.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Previous roll.
Thank you. Hearing no objection to previous roll, congratulations, Alderman Aldridge, on your speed hump bill.
Thank you.
And I realize I also made a mistake. And did we have any public testimony for that?
We have none.
Okay, thank you. I was so eager to pass the speed hump bill that I forgot to ask. So thank you. All right, with that, Alderwoman Schweitzer is still not back to present her two board bills that we have today. So at this time, what we're going to do is we're going to take a recess until 2:15. That's 2:15 p.m. And at that time, we will proceed. You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. At this time, if we are able, what I would like to do is have the committee substitute for Board Bill number 217 put in front of us.
Absolutely. Do we have a motion to put committee substitute Board Bill 217 in front of us?
So moved.
Thank you. I'll second the motion. Alderwoman, you may proceed.
I may need a call, a vote.
I need a roll.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. Let's go ahead and call the roll.
Alderman Vollmer. Alderwoman Keys.
Aye.
Alderman Browning.
Aye.
Alderman Aldridge. Chair Schweitzer.
Aye.
Alderman Vollmer. Alderman Aldridge. We have 3 aye votes.
Thank you. So having this committee substitute in front of us, in this committee, we've gone through this bill numerous times. I think it's its 4th hearing now or 3rd. I can't remember, but we keep talking about it because it's that important. We're trying to get it right. So what's happened in the last few weeks, to give folks at home a summary, is we had this bill in committee. We discussed it in committee, had a lot of great public feedback. Also, Alderman Vice Chair Browning and I attended a meeting in the community where we heard even more feedback, and there was a workshop last week with members of the administration, folks who work and are heavily involved in complete streets ordinances and implementing of our infrastructure and building out our streets. I had a workshop last week was that just last week? No, wow, 2 weeks ago. Oh man, 2 Thursdays ago, with the folks with Smart Growth America who came and led us in a workshop and then a walking tour around City Hall where we discussed how this complete streets policy might interact with our built environment. Members of the advocacy community attended that walking workshop, and we got a lot of great feedback from that event. Have also met twice with the administration about this bill with people who'd be charged with implementing this bill, and have gotten a lot of feedback from them as well. So this committee substitute today, I'll go through some of the changes that are in it. So you'll see that pedestrian is still defined, but there's a little bit more definition of ability and what that would mean, and matching some of the language that was recommended by the Office on the Disabled. And there was, in the next section regarding the principles, it was noted that we should broaden the improvements that would be considered in a complete streets policy, broadening it from just the listed improvements to include but not limited to, just to make sure that we're broad with there, because we do lay out further in the third section, or the third number in that same section, the various places where the people doing this work should find these sorts of improvements. And that's based on some of the known resources that cities are using to implement these policies and traffic calming standards. Further, we added in the complete streets exemptions language, adding in, again, this was a suggestion by David Newberger with the Office on the Disabled, that we use the same language in this bill as in implementing other ADA accessibility issues in the city regarding implementing the policy would result in a fundamental alteration of the city's services, programs, or activities that would result in an undue and financial and administrative burden, that wording would be used as one of the exemption wordings. We changed in section 5 in training, we changed the word considered to utilize to be a little bit stronger in terms of making sure that training opportunities are put into place when deciding all of the things that this bill does. In section 6, we have an implementation addition that the street division would be generating the plan, yet the various other departments would be providing input, and also noting that the 5-year plan would be updated annually. Further into that same section of implementation, we further discuss the prioritization level, including more language around specifics around disabilities that may impact folks' ability to interact with the roads, and also adds a rate of fatalities and or injuries as a component of the planning of the street work that's being done. And I think that's a good suggestion as well. In the next section of implementation, it does more to go over the Complete Streets Advisory Committee. In this section, you'll see some additions like adding in the Sustainability Director or their designee, and adding a community member of the Community Mobility Committee, which was suggested by numerous commenters. Then you'll see a lot crossed out, and that's not because we're getting rid of those things, but as much as they're showing up somewhere else in the bill now. You can see that we put all of the duties under the duties of the committee instead of having them in places in the bill. Moved who is looking at the best practices under the actual creation of the 5-year plan instead of a role of the Complete Streets Committee. Although members of the Complete Streets Committee would be people who were involved in the plan, so they would be intimately aware of why those things are there and what practices. And it goes, we had the vulnerable populations benchmark language in another section, so we moved that from that section and put it somewhere else in the bill. And then the rest of the updates we had some updates there that were just making the verbs match, getting that right. We have in the reports of the committee denoting the difference between protected and unprotected pedestrian accommodations, so that is lined out to be more specific in the reporting. And then just a little bit more, again, with the what the committee would be reviewing the 5-year plan, and that there's some language here that I think still needs work regarding how the committee approves or denies exemption requests or transportation projects. We want this to be a process that we're implementing that makes sense in how it moves, and so we have a little bit more work to do there. Then the rest part that's crossed out, you'll see that's just something that was moved to a different section of the bill just to make our bill a little clearer here. So then it has a severability clause, and that's the version of the bill as it is now. I will say adopting, well, I do hope to adopt this committee substitute so it's what's in front of the public and what people can see. It's still a work in progress. Already we have meetings scheduled with further meeting scheduled with the administration and with the consultants who are doing the transportation mobility plan. If you remember hearing at the beginning, first few meetings where members of the Board of Public Service and Planning and Zoning were wanting to make sure that their feedback was incorporated into the bill before we moving forward. So that's something that's very important, and we want to make sure that we take our time and get a good policy, and I think we're headed in that direction. And so today I'm just hoping to adopt this committee substitute so the most up-to-date version is in front of people and we can still have feedback on it. And then I would not plan on taking any further votes of this bill until reintroducing it at the start of next session so that we can have a bill that has had so much time for input and so many different parties giving their input so that we know we can do the bill and move forward with it as it will be ready to introduce at the beginning of next session.
Thank you. So I believe we've put the committee substitute before us, and now we need to adopt the committee substitute. So do we have a motion to adopt this committee substitute?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there a request for previous roll?
We have to
Previous
call,
roll.
We have to call roll.
Oh, we do have to call roll since.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Objection.
Alderman Vollmer,
Aye.
Alderwoman Keys,
Aye.
Alderman Browning,
Aye.
Alderman Aldridge, Chair Schweitzer,
Aye.
Alderman Aldridge. You have 4 aye votes.
Okay, we have adopted the committee substitute. At this time, Alderman, do you have any more comments, or do you want to see if we have any public speakers?
Thank you. Unless anybody has questions for me at this point, I think moving on to the public would be.
Committee, how do we feel about letting the public speak before any questions? Is that good? Okay, I think we're good. Do we have any public speakers?
We do. Mr. Charles Bryson with TrailNet. I have to swear you in.
Yeah, I know.
Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, you may proceed. You have 3 minutes.
3 minutes? Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Charles Bryson with TrailNet. I'm here to speak very specifically about Board Bill number 217. I think it's a very good bill. I think it is a marvelous change from what we have had previously, very specifically on the section that talks about the different departments and agencies that the Complete Streets policy could work with, and all those that are named as resources is wonderful because it expands the ability of the Complete Streets coordinator or director to use a wide variety of organizations and what they do. I do have a concern about the preliminary design completion and then going out to the public. As I've said previously, once preliminary design is done, which means 30%, that is probably where the organization or the traffic engineers will stop. and they'll take a little bit of comment, but they won't modify much. I think we really need to look at that as a section that says we really need to have a lot more public engagement before you have the 30% preliminary design. I noticed that throughout the bill that there is the word street division. I'm not sure why that is instead of it being the streets department. Also on the Complete Streets Advisory Committee, which I think is just an excellently written section, let me make a suggestion, and that is the treasurer's office is included. Because anytime you have parking, you have the potential for pedestrian issues and bike issues. So I would encourage the notation of the treasurer's office be invited to those meetings as well, because I think a lot of what we do on our streets are important to the treasurer's office. I do like that you have in writing that the committee shall meet once a month, and those meetings should be open to the public. I really think that really brings some honesty and transparency to the process. Other than that, I will say I am somewhat disappointed that we're going to hold this until the regular time next year, or the regular introduction, the next session, because I think this needs to go first. You have to do this before you get to the Transportation Mobility Committee and their process, or mobility study, I should say, and their process. I really would urge us to think really hard about this being the most important bill that you will, other than Vision Zero, which is a resolution, the most important piece of legislation you may pass, because this sets the floor and makes everything else accountable to it. So I would urge some rethought about that, and perhaps we could look at making this come alive by the end of this this session. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Does any of the committee have any questions for Mr. Bryson?
Especially from my good friend Joe Vollmer.
No questions. Very well put, Charles. Very well thought out as always. You're on your game. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Seeing no other questions, thank you for your testimony today. Alderwoman Schweitzer, I think we're going to move to committee questions now. We'll start with Vollmer.
No questions of concern. I would, if possible, I appreciate the chance to go over and make this thing perfect. But anyone involved in legislation knows it's never going to be perfect. But to try and get it out before the end of the year, I do agree with Mr. Bryson, would be something that we maybe should strive for, if possible, not to rush it for any, not just to do it, but if it's possible to get it in a way, shape, and form that works, and to get it passed out, I believe that would be one of our goals. Thank you.
Alderwoman Schweitzer, do you have a comment on that?
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think there's a lot of push and pull between having a good piece of legislation that the people who are going to be implementing it can agree that they can do, and then having us all agree at the board that we can get it done as well. So yeah, I've gone back and forth in my mind about whether or not we should just pass it, and then if we make any changes, we can come back and do that. I think one of the pieces that has been brought up to me is how we change from how we do street planning now, which is very alderman driven, to having the streets department and the other agencies more involved. So I think that if we were going to try to pass this out this session, it would be just with having some more information in here about when I guess I'd be interested in when we're enacting this, because we obviously would have a pretty big change from the streets from what is happening right now with aldermen moving projects forward to get into the streets department and these other agencies charged with creating a plan and producing the plan. Perhaps if we were wanting to, if we were having a section in here that explained, ahead amount of time or the first year that the plan would be put in, the feedback we've gotten from Smart Growth America that the bill still needs is having benchmarks. So if we can put it together, a benchmark section that answers some of that. I think if the committee were willing, we could hear it again next week. And, I could certainly commit to being ready to pass it out of committee at that time. I do know that the, administration still had questions. I don't know if they have as many questions as they veto it. That's not something I have the answer to. So I would want some consideration that we were going to pass a bill that wasn't going to get vetoed, because then we're in the same boat. So that's something that I would work on my end, with whether or not we could change the timeline to passing it out next week. And of course, some commitment from you all, which I think we have, that there's more that we need to change than just the processes in this bill in order to make it work. We know we need to have changes in funding, how funding moves through to the departments. We know we need all of that as well. So as long as I had the commitment from you all to continue to work on that, and we can have some reasonable benchmarks, I could see moving it ahead, because I do hear that feedback. And that might be a good compromise, but I do want to note that I have said that I would talk with the consultants about the bill as well. And the earliest they gave me was the end of April. So I don't have the ability to get their feedback at this time until then, even though I will have to take a minute and talk to those folks. But I wouldn't be planning on passing it today either way. But I appreciate that feedback, Alderman Vollmer.
Thank you. Alderwoman Keys.
No comments. Thank you.
Alderman Aldridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I echo what Alderman Vollmer said. I was ready to pass it out. I know our time frame, it had been second read, and, probably could have had time if it got on the informal to be able to place it, or perfection on the informal, then could the last week suspend the rules. But I know you want to do your due diligence and make sure all stakeholders are involved, could even put an effective date to later on. So if things would have had to come back and make changes, it didn't mean it would have went immediately into effect and could do those changes. But however you want to handle the process, Alderwoman, you have my commitment to work with you on it, ready to support it if it's this week or next week. And yeah, I appreciate your hard work on it.
Thank you. I also do not have any questions, just a couple comments. I definitely hear what Mr. Bryson was saying, specifically about bringing in the treasurer's office and parking. I'm not sure exactly the order of operations there. I do think that the streets has purview over everything between the curbs. But on the other hand, parking has a definite impact on pedestrian activity. Something I see in my neighborhood all the time is people parking way too close, or even in the crosswalks, which could be avoided with better street design, daylighting intersections, making sure that people don't park in places where they're obstructing the view, all that kind of stuff. Parked cars, even if they're not moving, are still dangerous if they're obstructing the view of somebody driving on the road or trying to cross. So that's a good thought. Otherwise, I'm very pleased with the work you continue to do, Alderwoman, on this bill. I see several really positive changes, and every time this bill gets looked at, we just keep making it better, and that's really a testament to your work and your LA's work as well. So just want to say thank you for that. My understanding was that with the transportation mobility plan, we did need to communicate a little more with them to make sure that we weren't duplicating processes or plans. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's why we might not be able to pass it out today.
So that's a good point. So the transportation mobility plan, as part of their contract, the work that they have to move forward with us, and that's something that was funded through American Rescue Plan Act funds, it does say in there that they will be doing a review of our ordinances. To the point that I think you and I have made a few times in the committee, is that when they're doing a review of our ordinances, shouldn't we want an ordinance that's the best, most up-to-date, most modern ordinance for them to review and see where we are in meeting that ordinance, as opposed to, here's a 10-year-old ordinance, how are we doing with it, and here's some changes you should make, which, we're paid to do this job too. We kind of know what changes we need to make. So I definitely lean in favor of having a good ordinance, and then having them review, what else might need to change, or how do we get to the point where we're actually incorporating this. So I think if we were going to compromise and try to pass it this session, it would be having a vote on this in committee next week with the understanding that what is in committee next week will likely be, we'll be moving to perfection. I'd have to suspend the rules to move it to perfection to have it be perfected next week. But, you know, I would hope that I could do my work and have whatever is in the committee substitute next week be ready then to be perfected. I definitely understand the urgency. It's just trying to juggle a lot of different places where input is coming and what kind of input they want in order to have a bill that will not just be looked at as, oh, we can't do that for some reason and it isn't done. And I know that's not what legislation is supposed to do, but we all have examples of pieces of legislation that were passed and the pieces of them that aren't working for whatever reason or just not being done. And so what I want is a real solution, a real process that really works, and not a gold star next to my name that I passed this legislation this session. So, you know, it's trying to juggle all of those things. And so I can commit to having another committee substitute ready for next week that I think would be ready to pass, but then it would be up to many other people to actually implement. So I'm cognizant of that as well.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And again, thank you for your work on this. I have no more comments or questions. Close.
Thank you. I will communicate with the various stakeholders on this bill and communicate with the committee by the end of the week whether or not they should expect this bill in front of them again next week. Thank you all for your comments, and thank you to Charles Bryson for coming every week when this bill is heard. It's a testament to your dedication. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And you might want to stay up there because the next one is you as well.
Thank you.
You're recognized on board bill number 240.
Thank you. So this board bill is one of my favorite kinds of boards bill, where it's basically, here's a lot of money that we just got and now we're accepting it. And in order to talk more about that bill, the wonderful policy director from the mayor's office, Casey Milberg, is here to give a little bit of an overview of that bill and what it says and what it does. But for those at home, this is a bill that is accepting money into the water division. So we all know how excited I am about that. I get made fun of for it a lot. Director Milberg, are you able to come up? Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for being here. As always, I will yield to you.
Sure. Hello, Casey Milberg, Policy Director in the Mayor's Office, for the record. And as Alderwoman Schweitzer, our fantastic bill sponsor and fantastic champion of all things water and all things infrastructure in the city, has said, this is a great bill to accept a lot of money for the city to address a really important issue that faces the city of St. Louis. Specifically, it accepts 2 grants in the amounts of $400,000 and the $5,050,000 from the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, which is administered by the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. And the purpose of these funds is to both identify lead service lines and then implement health-oriented repairs to our city's water infrastructure. By way of context, we do have some data about the need for this in the city, and Director Kurt Scooby of our Water Division couldn't be here today, sends his apologies along with some information and the imperative to stress how needed this money is. You know, we do have some data that's provided under the America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018. And the data collected under that act shows that there's a truly tremendous number of lead service lines in the city of St. Louis. A conservative estimate is about 60,000 that we can consider unknown but very likely. We've already identified 7,000 lead service lines in the city. Using the same data, nonpartisan impartial groups like the Environmental Defense Fund have classified St. Louis as being in the top 10 cities in the United States in terms of the number of most lead pipes. So it's a dubious and concerning distinction. So what these funds will do is allow us to first and foremost get a better handle on how many lead service lines and where they are in the city, specifically looking at those 60,000. And then also to begin looking at later on down the line replacing them and you know, addressing other health-oriented repairs for our city's water infrastructure. In terms of the identification work, that's likely to begin later on this year, with the replacement being the next phase of that project. the big picture in terms of, in general, just it being a numerical need and the prevalence of those in our community is that we also know this is a racial justice and equity issue in our city. Black children are nearly twice as likely as white children here to test positive for elevated blood levels. Lead is a neurotoxin, and high blood levels have extremely serious health impacts for children, including learning disabilities and behavioral problems. So this money is greatly needed. It's a good investment, and it's going to be a very good use of the city's time and resources to begin using it to assess the true extent of our lead service lines in the community, and then again, the next phase of replacing them.
Okay, thank you. Does any member of the committee have any questions for Ms. Mulberg?
No questions. Thank you very much.
As always, we appreciate you being here. This has been a very long meeting, and you've been here for most of it. So thank you so much. And Alderwoman Schweitzer, you are recognized again. First of all, Clerk, do we have any members of the public? I don't see any, but do we have any online?
I do not have any public speakers. I have one written testimony in support from Dr. Mati.
Wonderful.
Excellent. All right.
Dr. Mati is our director of our health department.
Yes, and we're glad that she's for this as well. If the committee doesn't have any more questions for Alderwoman Schweitzer, I will recognize Bose.
Thank you.
Can I be added as a co-sponsor?
Oh, that's an excellent point. Please add Alderwoman Keys as a co-sponsor, and please add myself as a co-sponsor as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you all for your time today. I know it's been a long one. I appreciate the importance of this bill and getting much needed funds into our water division and into making sure that we have safe, healthy drinking water. So with that, I would ask for a do pass recommendation and appreciate your support today.
Thank you. I will entertain a motion for a do pass recommendation for Board Bill 240.
So moved.
Second, previous roll.
Hearing no objection.
I do not have Alderman Aldridge.
Okay, we cannot. Oh, there he
Here I
is.
am.
There he is.
Okay,
I'm an aye. Previous roll, no objections.
good.
Okay, congratulations, Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you.
Handing the chair back to you to close the meeting. Yay.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for those stuck around. I know this has been one of our longest, if not the longest, public infrastructure utility meeting that we've had to date. So with that, moving on the agenda, and I have one. We have completed board bills for review, resolutions for review,
We have none.
committee discussions.
Just one. Please add me as a co-sponsor to the last bill.
To Board Bill 240, thank you.
So noted.
Thank you, Alderman. Acknowledgement of any written testimony. We've acknowledged it throughout, but Madam Clerk?
Just that one for Board Bill 240.
Right. We had other written testimony, but we acknowledged that earlier. Yes, wonderful. Announcements. We will have a public infrastructure and utilities meeting next week on Wednesday at 3:30 at our regular time. Thank you all for being amenable to this change. Any other announcements?
All members are present.
Wonderful. We have no excused members then. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second, previous roll.
Thank you. I hear no objection. We are adjourned.